All right, what's up, everybody? I know it's been a while since I've started a hangout here on Truth Talk. We're going to try to start doing these hangouts a little bit more often here. We've got Eddie, Geotaurus, MM Artist, Nate Dogg, Steven, Veckel, and myself. And the hangout's going to be a general topic. We can talk about anything that pertains to the great debates or anything that's really on your mind. Um, put the link out there in just a moment. But before I do, I'd like to actually screen share uh, a news article. One moment, guys, that has to do with a bill that was just passed on abortion. Okay, can you guys see it?
Yep.
All right. It says, it's loading too slow. Give me 1 second. Okay, so Oklahoma House passes bill banning all abortions. It says late on Thursday, the Oklahoma House of Representatives passed a bill that fully bans abortion in the state. Oklahoma SB 1552 passed by 59-9, a vote in the heavily Republican legislator. The law is now on the desk of the state Republican governor, Mary Fallin, who has yet to address whether she plans to sign the legislation into law. If she does, the state could face one of the most intense federal legal battles on the issue. The controversial Oklahoma bill manages to sideline abortion services by revoking the medical license of any doctor found performing the procedure for any other reason that in cases of miscarriage or severe physical trauma to the fetus or pregnant woman. Doctors who do perform abortions outside the spectrum may find felony charges. The prohibition includes abortions required to save the life of pregnant women. However, including inducing an early birth to save the life of the fetus would be illegal, or would be legal. Um, so, what do you guys think about this? I'm going to give you guys the link in the side chat right here so that you guys can check it out if you guys would like. What do you guys think about this? Do you think that this is a good law that's being passed? What's your take on it? Make sure I get this.
Well, I'll say if I can go first here, I am against the idea of enforcing theocratic ideals upon people. So to me, this issue is kind of tricky. But then again, I don't know if we can actually say that this is necessarily theocratic here, because I mean, there's non-theists out here who are also against abortion, but they're more for giving the woman the so-called choice. So I don't know. I mean, I actually like the idea that it's against the law, but I'm wondering what kind of repercussions could come out of it, though.
Yeah, in my opinion, it's just I think they just kind of took it too far, and even if it was to be signed, the federal government would most likely take it to court, and the Supreme Court would most likely find it unconstitutional, and it'll be reappealed. At the end of the day, it'll realistically be a waste of taxpayers' money, to be honest. And honestly, in my opinion, I mean, one could argue that one could argue that you're putting church and state together, religion and state together, because they're not doing it for the most part, out of the safety of any one person per se, right? It's based on what they believe. Now, I'm against it, right? But in certain situations, it's going to be needed. You get what I'm saying? And I feel as if, I feel as if just taking it to this extent is just going overboard. I believe that it should be heavily regulated. Um, you know, and but I don't think it's just one of those things you just outright just ban and expect for there not to be any repercussions whatsoever. And as I said, most even if it to me it just seems like a move that would they're including church and state in one thing. That's just my
Well,
take on it.
well, I mean, I have my own takes on separation of church and state. I think it's not exactly how it's been popularized or presented in the media. That's, I guess, we're going to get into that a little later if you guys would like. But my thing is that I think that this is actually, I think it's a good thing in a way, because I think one of the worst things that you can do. I mean, what is murder? Murder is wrong, really, because you're taking the life or shortening the life of somebody, right? So when you're taking the life of a being that's not even out of the womb, I mean, you can't shorten it any more than that. I mean, so I think this is like one of the worst things you can do is to take the life of a baby before it's even born.
Yeah, that's
But
true.
I understand. I understand. I see where you guys are coming from. I mean, if like there were life-threatening like situations, like there would be, I guess, good reasons why somebody would have to, maybe perform an abortion. But even when I would look in that direction to say, okay, well, maybe certain scenarios might be the only resort that we have left. I mean, I still struggle to tell myself that it's a good thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, the implications, it could go, this could go so badly. Um, and I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
I'm one of those guys who believe that all life is precious. But I guess what I guess the question is, when is it that you would constitute as something as being alive? You get what I'm saying? Is it, is the child alive from conception? Is it alive after a couple of weeks? The question is, what we need to determine first is when is something is going to be constituted as being alive. Do you judge by when it develops a heart, or when it starts to develop a heart, or or a mind? That's those are the questions that I think they should be trying to answer right now, because as I said, it's just one of those things where I'm against it, but you know I understand why it's there. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I can understand that. Sure, can I talk for a sec?
Yeah, go ahead, man.
Um, just for, I would like to know the details of the legislation first. I linked in the side chat the Oklahoma State government website and see if we can just track it. So I'd like to see the actual details and see where it may allow for abortion when it says it's not okay, just so we can get an actual idea of what the actual thing's proposing. Yes, so if you could do that in the side chat or something, that'd be sweet. But yeah, if the child's birth is going to endanger the mother, or if it has a severe, say, birth defect, she should have the right, by all means, and as it seems to be agreed upon here, that she has the right to abort because it can be detrimental. Say financial reasons, so its quality of life is going to be low. If it's a severe birth defect and it's birthed, well, then you're going to run into complications of, well, let's have a look at what's morally right. To allow it to be birthed, but to go through some kind of severe pain or agony and so forth, or to terminate it while it's in the womb before it even gets to experience that level of pain, what would be morally right? I would say the abortion. If we go, then that's the late stages. If we go to the early stages where we're not talking about a thing with a developed brain, so it can't feel pain. It's an embryo or a zygote and so forth, as we had in a prior discussion. well, she should have the right to terminate on a whim if she just doesn't want to be raped or she just doesn't want to have a child.
Yeah, okay, so some parts of that I agree with, but this is what you got to understand, right? Um, During development, it reaches a point when the baby or the fetus, right, it's not going to be necessarily a part of the mother, as in it's its own person. Does that make sense? So if you wanna, and that's one of the main reasons why so much people are against it, because if you want to use morally, it is wrong to kill another person, and since technically the fetus is considered another person, then you're essentially committing murder. You get what I'm saying? If you want to take morals, but this is the thing with morals, right? Human beings in general, it's suggestive and it's subjective, and this is why, well, you need debate and you need to settle on certain things before you make certain decisions. Now, when in the case of a woman being raped or whatever, now if you're a woman and you've been raped and you feel as if you might be pregnant, then the first thing you should do is to go visit a doctor and see what you can do to prevent that pregnancy before any form of development really starts. And I don't have any problem with that. But once it gets to the point where there is development and you can consider this fetus another person, then that's a whole different story for me, anyways. Because I don't think any woman would want to carry a child, a rape baby, essentially. And you don't want a child being raised in the world not being loved and being despised or whatever. And that's a really high chance that that might happen. And it's just reality, man. As I said, I don't like the idea, but it's just one of those situations where, personal feelings aside, what's there for the greater good, taking into consideration, the child and the mother, because the mother is a person. Also, you can't just rule out the mother and that's it. You have to take into consideration what she's going to be going through when if she decides to carry the child, or she's forced to carry the child, whichever way you want to look at it. So it's not the moral aspect of it. It's really all over the place. And until, I think, in my opinion, when we settle on certain details on when the procedure can be done and when it's too late, and why it should be done. That's just my take on it. I hear silence.
You said a couple things that you said a couple things that I sort of agree with and sort of disagree with, but I guess you're speaking subjectively, so I don't even know where to start.
No, I'm just trying to be objective, to be honest.
Yeah. To me, I don't know. It's a tough one. Again, I'm definitely against the issue of abortion, especially if it's for a case where somebody's talking pragmatically, saying things like, I just can't afford to take care of this baby, or I'm worried about, the environment the baby's going to grow up in, and all this other stuff. I'm sort of, I guess the only word I can think of to use at this point is agnostic to certain issues regarding, the detriment to the mother's health, stuff like that. So I don't know how God, because I always try my best to make God and His Word the foundation of every decision I make. So in this case here, in such cases, I don't know what I would say. However, again, going back to the law being enforced in Oklahoma, Uh, Not quite sure how I feel about that, to be totally honest with you. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I really don't know what to say about that. I guess I am the people who's behind this law. Was it all theists, all Christians, or was it a combination of different people?
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I am not 100% sure. From what it looks like it's still going
Oh,
through the
okay.
process as to whether or not, it's gonna.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I think it might actually be fought. So, I mean, but the way that I feel about it, I do think that there should be some open space to where if an abortion is the only way out, to where there's a door open so that they can do it. They shouldn't be so strict to just ban all abortions, but I think they should make it to where if the fetus is going to be healthy and the mother is going to be healthy, then they should allow the baby to be born.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
If somebody, for example, like you guys brought up about being raped, I don't think, okay, it's sad what happened to the woman, right? She got raped, but that baby is its own entity. It's its own living. It's a living being. So I mean,
Right.
you cannot blame the baby for what the father had done. So I mean, I don't see a reason why
Right.
the baby should be killed or its life should be taken or shortened because of what the father did. So I don't think that any laws should be able to allow a rape victim to murder the baby or anything like that. Maybe make the door easy to maybe give the baby up for adoption or something like that, but not to take its life.
That's what I was gonna bring up too. Adoption. It's really, really, really hard to adopt a baby in the United States. It's actually easier to adopt a baby from overseas and cheaper. And which is ridiculous because yeah, if it's
That doesn't make any sense.
yeah, it doesn't make any sense. My girlfriend, she's doing her master's in social work, and I asked her about it, and she confirmed it and showed me her sources, and the system is just stupid and convoluted and expensive for no reason. But to the main point, as I said, it goes back to what you have to. I think what they have to do first is determine when is the baby alive? Is it from conception or is it after a couple of weeks? Now, you get what I'm saying?
And then
that's the first thing that they need to determine.
That's when True said that when it's its own entity, that a woman who was raped shouldn't be allowed to abort and should birth it and put it up for adoption. If this woman's raped, right, there's a certain by about a few months where she's able to be tested, and where you're only talking about a basic non-human embryo. It's a human embryo, but it's not a baby as it wouldn't have any rights by any means, not recognized as a human and so forth, but it is a human embryo. Would you be fine for abortion at that stage, at a very early stage, it doesn't have a fully developed brain? It's nothing like 7 months on or something like that, where it's more of a...
Yeah, in the embryonic stage, it's like days, pretty much. And I mean, that is the case for most states here. So, I mean, after a couple of weeks, you can't... They won't perform it,
True. Does that link you have? Does it have the code, the bill code search thing?
Let me look.
I'm just trying to find it on the Oklahoma government website and see the details of it. Oh yes, SB. I think this might be it. See if that works.
Yeah, I gotta step out, guys. So you guys take it easy.
Gotcha.
All right,
God bless.
That didn't work.
Oh man. Well, you gotta pick such a touchy subject, True. It's complicated, man. Like, regardless of how you feel, it's just one of those. It's like a moral cloud. You get what I'm saying? And the reason why it's a cloud is that not everyone thinks the same, and regardless of their beliefs. So I think the only way an issue like this can be really settled, is if realistically if everyone just come to a consensus, that would please everyone.
But yeah, I agree. That's why I say that. I mean, we gotta leave the door open so that just in
Mhm.
case. I mean, there's no way out, or depending on the circumstances, that an abortion might be able to, take place. But I mean, me and my feelings about it is that I don't think that an abortion should happen at all unless the baby's going to be suffering or is going to be in pain, or the mother's going to, the life is going to be at risk,
But you never
something
know
like that.
that until the late stages, though. That's the issue. You
Hmm.
can't tell that from the embryonic stage.
Well, I don't think that I may have just threw that on you guys, because I don't think you guys took a look at it. So we can move on to another topic if you guys would like. Is there something else you guys would like to talk about?
Actually, I was looking into. Okay, so I went and watched Steve's Hangouts again. Um, I watched some of it, not all of it. Um, and I mainly watched the part where Tommy was um having a discussion with a couple of them. First, it was one person, and then two, three more people had to jump in or whatever. And I mean, it just seems it's all wordplay, man. And why is it so hard to just simply pull up, either get a dictionary or I don't know, Google the definition of a word, you know? Pull
Well,
up
yeah,
some scientific articles, go to
yeah.
Nature. Nature has a ton of articles on the subject, I mean, it just seems like word games to me.
Oh,
Yeah,
what topic?
yeah, I hear what you're
What's
saying. I started watching the beginning of it, and I didn't watch it all. There was a lot of over talking, and there was just. I would just say that Tommy's a very, very patient man.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I agree with you. I mean, if they understand what we mean by something and we explain that, they should leave it alone. They should deal with what we're saying and stop asking for different definitions. If they have definitions that they prefer, then they can use that. But
Yeah, I
that's
mean, um I'm pretty sure MMA artists want specifics. So basically, one of the guys um pulled up a picture, and it was showing a bunch of basically a bunch of cats, lions, tigers, house cats, anything feline, right? And you know, what the guy was saying was they all certain felines evolved from a common ancestor, right? He didn't say all of them had a like one main common ancestor, right? He was saying that certain, some of them they had a different ancestor, and he was calling them species, and that's really not the case. It's variations, different variations. It's like dogs, and they even brought it um to dogs, and I mean it's technically not evolution, since we've tampered with their genomes and kind of made them what
yeah,
we want them to be. But
yeah.
hey,
I know what you're talking about. I actually had a brief talk with him on Neffy's channel. I don't know if you were in there at the time, Steve, but it didn't last very long. But I think that he showed the screenshot there. So let's take a look at what he was trying to show. Um,
I don't know. I think his definitions was kind of all over the place, and they kept changing. I mean, a species
Well, that
is a
same guy,
species.
yeah, that same guy's been sending me messages, and I was hoping he was going to come in. He said he would come and have a chat tonight, so he might come in a little later, actually. But what he was saying was like really, really silly. I mean, first of all, he's going to have to show the common ancestor how they all diverge from it. He can't just show a picture of different species that look the same. Okay, here it is right here. Whatsoever mechanisms of evolution can produce environment. From there, go ahead. No. All right, guys. Can you see what I'm showing you?
Can't see it.
Okay, give me 1 second. All right, can you see it now?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. This didn't last very long, actually. He left, like, really fast.
Because first I have to lay groundwork to see where you all are at. You all are making.
Here's what I want to.
I agree with science.
Here's what I want to know. Here's what I want to know. I'll start it.
Right?
I'll start it so that we're not gonna. We'll know where we're at right now.
Okay.
I think that intelligent design is a superior science. I do not think that there is absolutely any evidence whatsoever suggesting that the mechanisms of evolution can produce the complexities that we're seeing and the different anatomical features we're seeing in the different phylum. There's nothing, and that you will not be able to support that or prove that in any way at all. So from there, go ahead.
Okay, but I'm out of here. If y'all start interrupting me, I'm out of here. I want fairness. Okay? I'm going to provide a few pieces of evidence, and can you show them in the room, please, to everybody? And then I want to ask you about this because I need to find out where you stand.
All right, what is this right here?
Just show that and tell me why that's not evolution.
This is not evolution for the same reason why we would see, for example, dirt bikes, motorcycles. Okay, you're going to have to hold on a second. Hold on 1 second, all right? All right.
Is that you again, LaShawn?
Can you guys see it? Can you guys see it?
No.
All right, give me 1 minute. I'm sorry, guys. Give me a second.
Okay, so I see. What it is all the variety, the types of cats in the world.
Okay, so you can see it, right, guys?
I can't. No.
It says I'm sharing the screen right now.
Don't make the mistake.
Sometimes there's a bit of a delay before it does it, Ronnie. It hasn't come on for me yet.
All right, hold on a second. I don't know what's going on. I'll try it one more time. All right. Google Plus is always going around.
And when you get it up, I'll tell you why it's evolution.
All right, did you see it?
No.
Okay, can somebody else screen share this, please?
Yeah.
I see it now.
It says on screen.
This is my first piece of many, so I'll move quickly.
I saw it, but then it disappeared.
Okay, now I say this is evolution because all of these species came from a common ancestor. There's 36 species here, and only 6 of those can interbreed. So once these species diverge into their own group where they cannot interbreed, then they become a species by definition. And if they can't interbreed, don't say they're the same kind.
Okay, well, here's the problem that I have with that. First of all, in order for you to say that any of these different, or well, actually, this is the best place to start, where I was going to start off before. I would say that this is equivalent to me looking at the different, dirt bikes or motorcycles or four-wheelers, things like that. I would see a consistency of similarities within what would designers see. So because of that, because we can look at it from the same perspective and conclude still a creator, the same type of prediction is not going to be in any way supportive of evolution. That's what I would say. Second thing I would say is that any of these intermediates that are far apart, for example, cats and tigers, I would ask for you to prove where the complexity can come from, where the incremental changes can lead to those complexities. Can you prove to that natural selection mutation can lead to those complexities?
I didn't hear an answer. Did they come from a common ancestor or not?
They did not come from a common ancestor.
Okay, well,
I'd like you to answer my question now.
Okay, I don't want to be interrupted or I'm leaving. I'm not going to play this game.
Okay, but you got to answer questions too. So
I'm trying to explain. Let me make my case. Okay, you're trying to make a negative case. If you want to make a positive one, go ahead, but a negative case is not going to matter. So DNA evidence shows that markers are created each time an evolutionary change occurs. The DNA evidence has mapped these out, and they have the markers named and numbered and everything, how they share a common ancestor.
Like DNA evidence doesn't support anything, though. How are you going to say that DNA evidence supports that they have a common ancestor? Hold on. There's a claim within what you're trying to say that you got to back up. If you're saying that DNA evidence supports that there's a common ancestor, some of these cats, for example, share an equivalent difference between chimpanzees and humans. The common house cat and some of these tigers, for example, that's a 5% difference, coming out to about 48 million nucleotides. There's a lot of differences in that many amount of nucleotides. So you're going to have to actually go through those nucleotides, those sequences, and explain those differences. If I'm going to go over there and look at a couple of books that are all sharing the 26-character English alphabet, they might have 50% of the same sequences with each other. I can't therefore declare that they came from a common author, right? I can't say something like that. So similarity in sequences is not going to justify a common ancestor.
Okay, well, if they can interbreed, then do they share a common ancestor? Where do you stand? Because you all try to have it both ways. You say they do evolve, and then you say they don't evolve. So which is it? Do they evolve or not?
Let me interject something. I personally believe God created.
Go away.
This isn't just an exclusive.
You're dumb as dirt. Let me talk to somebody else.
This is a hangout. Oh, okay, you're out of here. Bye-bye. Now you're blocked.
Yeah, that's what I thought, you cowards. Chicken shits.
Look, if all you're going to do...
So, I guess I'll leave this up for you guys, actually. I wanted to show that whole thing that just happened right there, because while he was speaking with Tommy, he was being all of them were being very interruptive. They were all being like really rude to Tommy. I think they were. They weren't letting him speak alone and just talk to the guy. It was supposed to be a debate, right? So I just felt that his, because he left. Nephilim Free didn't kick him out. I felt that the way that he approached the situation, because others wanted to talk and they were waiting for him to finish speaking, was a little bit hypocritical. But that was his claim pretty much. And what do you guys think about it?
Well, I'm reading this article that was posted in the chat.
Give me a second, guys. One thing I've noticed is that there's kind of an equivocation between artificial selection and natural selection. What happens is that's an example of an intelligently designed, these species of dogs have been intelligently designed and artificially selected for those particular traits. And what you're asking for is a natural process. And so in order to do that, that's kind of a categoric error in its own right. And at least if you could agree, Ronnie, or not, you're asking for a natural explanation, not an artificial selection. between
Right.
them.
Right, like for some of the, I believe the lions and cheetahs, for example, they can breed them, but it's artificially done. Um, and I would still argue that. I mean, from me, from somebody who looks at it from a creation standpoint, I would look at it like what I said from the beginning. You got, a creator would make different machines or equipments that all are identical to one another, dirt bikes, motorcycles, and so on.
Yeah, they all have the same body
Right, from that
plans.
standpoint, I could just say, well, God individually made different cats maybe that are very, very similar to one another, and maybe they could still possibly interbreed. But that's the reason why they're not going to have any viable offspring. But if he's going to sit over here and say that they originated from a common author or common ancestor, he first has to prove that. He can't just find something that is way, way, way down the line that's got a 48 million nucleotide difference and then declare it to be the common ancestor. Because that's not science. That's not proving anything.
Well, you also have to keep in mind that evolution is a natural process. It doesn't have the intervention of any types of humans artificially selecting for particular traits. It would have to be an unguided process. And definitionally, he's basically shot himself in the foot. And I don't think he understood that. And that's what happens when you actually understand evolution better than most atheists or material naturalists, is that you can see the errors in their own ways.
Well,
I don't mean to be brag.
Yeah, you can even, like, I'm sorry, go ahead, Gio.
No, I was done. Go ahead, buddy.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, even what you would consider like some of the closest related here, like the lions or tigers and some of the bigger cats, they still have a large difference in DNA, and even when they interbreed these organisms, they are very, very, very unhealthy, and they say that the way that their characteristics are almost like depressed cats, and they suffer from a lot of different health problems. So, I mean, I don't think that this is actually something that is in any way natural. I think that their body plans show that they're not supposed to mix, and that shows up after they've been mixed.
Well, wouldn't that definitionally show that the particular species is not suited to its own environment? Wouldn't that be kind of contrary to its own nature?
If you really look at it, look at the basic body plans for a lot of cats, or almost every single feline in the world. This is the thing. Their body plans, they're identical. Like, the general body plans are identical, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean that they're closely, like, that they have the same common ancestor. Like, I mean, yes, you could probably argue and say, okay, a lion and tigers might have the same ancestor, right? Because they're bigger and they're faster, and realistically, like, anatomically, they're not that different, right? The tiger is slightly bigger, right? But it doesn't have as much endurance as a lion. So, yes, that's what you call variation, where they vary based on the environment that they end up in. Right? That's variation. They didn't change. They didn't gain any new different parts or anything like that.
I disagree. I disagree that the tigers and the lions, that they originate from a common ancestor that variated it a little bit. I don't agree with that. I think that what happened were these were two distinct organisms that were created, but because
I'm just saying, even if you want to argue that, I just use that as an example, because anatomically they really do look the same.
Oh yeah, of course. Like some of these cats, like I say, it would be the difference between like maybe dogs and wolves. Like many of these cats, I'd say that you'd probably be able to interbreed them because, well, not many of them, a couple of them, I'd say that you can interbreed them because they just vary. They're the same organism that varied. But like these bigger cats that can interbreed, like the cheetah, well, that's artificially done. That's not something that happens naturally. And even the lions and the tigers, when they interbreed with each other, you can see that that's biologically that's not something that's supposed to happen, because the cats are
they're
usually
not
always
programmed that way. They're not programmed to interbreed, with tigers or anything else, and if you really think about it, if they're not programmed to breed that way, because if they weren't programmed to breed that way, they would be doing it, right?
It's
but
like
when you force it, what happens? Nothing good comes of it.
It's like coyotes, dogs, and wolves. They can all interbreed, but with some of the foxes, like the Arctic foxes, or I would say all the foxes, none of the foxes can interbreed. But if you they look like they're similar, like they're the same type of species when you look at them, but when you actually when you see their behaviors and how they behave, you can tell that they're completely different in many, many ways. So it's like there's Go ahead, Steve.
It's funny because I was watching a debate, and someone brought it up, and they were like, they asked a question, why was it that why couldn't it just be one specific cat species and just leave it at that? Why is it that there's so much? Now, this is the issue, right? One, if you're going to ask that question, right, I'm pretty sure you're going to have the answer to how they came about in the first place. And two, you got to explain why, like how the size difference came about, the bone densities and such, right? Even the diets. The other thing that you have to explain is the genetic differences between them. It's obvious. When these animals was designed, right, you had the main body plan, just like cars, right? You have a main body plan, you have specific parts that are in the vehicle, right? And then the designer said, I want more cars, right? But I want them to look different. So you apply the same basic plans, right? But you change the size, you change the look. You get what I'm saying? But the main body plan, it remains the same. Does that make sense? It's like the idea even with the finches,
Somewhat.
And yeah. So me personally, I think they were just designed that way. I'm not saying natural selection doesn't exist. We observe it every single day, right? If an animal is born, it's not born, optimally, right? Then it'll get weeded out for the most part, right? Variation happens because of the environment that they're in.
Right. When you look at it from a larger standpoint, you're looking at 99% of all the living organisms being distinct that have been here on the planet. So it's not going to be surprising that you're going to see variety of even the same type of species. You see that exactly with our own creation. We create a variety of the same type of thing, and the variety of different cars. Not everybody likes the exact same type of car. Some people like to tweak a certain way to where it looks a little different. You might prefer a truck. Some other people might prefer a Chevy over a Ford or something like that, for certain reasons. So, this is something that would fit under a creation model. I think what the difficulty becomes is when
anything can fit under a creation model at this point.
Yeah.
The creation model just can fit anything. It's like, you point out the fact, well, how can you fit all these species on the ark? And all of a sudden the answer is, well, it wasn't all these different species. It was just one type. It was just cat types, or it was dog types.
Well, I think the main problem is
that show them, say, well, look at all these different cats. And you ask them, well, is this a cat? Is this a cat? And you say, what?
Hold on, let's address some other things. So, just to backtrack a little bit, we're talking about genomics and how they can show evolution. So in the side chat, I linked a reference from genome research from Cold Spring Sample Laboratory.
And I read it.
Yeah. Comparative genomics as a tool to understand evolution and disease. and that will go through, how we use genomics to unravel just such a thing. One little title, The Principles of Comparative Genomics. Since then, comparative genomics has proven itself invaluable not only for illuminating evolutionary mechanisms and forces, but for informing the understanding of the human genome. The essence of the field of comparative genomics is that sequence that stays conserved, similar across multiple and or distant species, is likely to
Martis, before you get into that, he did make a statement, and I don't want us to figure out what he said, so let us deal with what he said earlier. Because I noticed a little comment that he put on the side. He said, conveniently, evolutionary theory predicts all of this. The problem is that we were bringing up is that so does a creation model. We can all make the same predictions based on what we're seeing. That's what we're talking about.
Yes, no. But creation,
I think the problem comes in. Hold on a second. One at a time. Hold on, Eddie. One at a time, Eddie. Eddie, hold on. I'm not finished with my statement. The problem is that when we're looking at the mechanisms of evolution, we got to know if the mechanisms of evolution can actually do that. If any gradual step-by-step process can lead to the differences that we're seeing here. Now, I pointed out that the differences that you're seeing between some of these cats is 95% of the same DNA. That's the same type of difference that we're seeing between humans and chimpanzees. So we got to know if the mechanisms of evolution can make those differences that we're seeing. We can't just declare it. So the predictability doesn't matter here, and that's what we're pointing out. We both predict the same thing, but the difference being is that which one of our mechanisms can actually meet that criteria of causality.
Go ahead, Eddie.
I'm thinking about what you said, honestly. So let me think about it.
Okay. So, go ahead, Gio. Sorry.
I just have an interesting question. A lot of people say that this could have been predicted by evolution, but they're looking from the past and looking to the future. But my question would be, what type of prediction could they make that could actually go from the present to the future? Like, what would be the sort of evolutionary jump you would see within, like, well, I'm just going to use an evolutionary term, from Homo sapiens? What type of traits would we exhibit? Would be what would evolution, as a science, in air quotes, predict to be the next evolutionary jump for us?
That's actually a very good question.
Because if it can predict, what would it predict to the future?
Well, evolutionary theory doesn't predict jumps. It predicts steps. So steps. But I'm using a euphemism, but just being a little more pedantic about it. But I'm saying, okay, what would be the next step then? Well, then you see the next step with every child that's born. Every child that's born shows the next step.
I'm talking about traits. I'm talking about traits. Right. I'm not talking about.
Every single child that's born exhibits a different trait in their parents.
Yeah, but you can't say that.
But that's variation.
No,
that's not evolution. It's variation.
Exactly, variation.
Okay. I'm not talking about the variation.
The allele frequency over a population. So
Gio said he wasn't talking about variations.
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about what. Okay. Like certain science fiction writers have spoken about.
That's what he's talking about.
Yeah, I'm talking about, or something that could give an advantage over a subpopulation within humans. Like, for example, let's say let's start using evolution now because it's convenient because we're on the topic. Because when people start talking about Neanderthals versus Homo sapiens, we obviously had an evolutionary advantage, according to the zoologists, that we had a bigger capacity for a brain, and that was kind of our advantage, and that was the next step that made us superior. What type of superiority of a subpopulation? I'm talking about more of a fitness function, getting a little more into that. What would we anticipate? That could cause the human race to subpopulate. Some people think superpowers. Some people start talking about. I've seen science fiction writing go everywhere, but I'm just saying, if you want to get into the science, what would, in air quotes, what would we anticipate to see?
It's very hard to predict human evolution because of the fact that we have advanced so much. We use technology to aid our adaptation to the environment. Other organisms don't do that. Or that they use the environment to help them in some way, but compared to anything else, we've used technology far more, obviously.
Okay, hold on.
Well, that's awfully convenient.
Let me.
What is the case? I mean,
hold on.
Like, hold on. If I go into a cold environment, I have multiple pieces of technology at my disposal. If I was to take a population of humans into, say, more along the lines of going into Alaska and so forth, even given, so say if I could just suspend the realities in which we live for a moment, apart from evolution, and just allow us to live for a few million years, or something like that, the chances of us diversifying to adapt to the environment is little if our technology keeps meeting our needs to that environment. We won't have that selective pressure whatsoever because we have that technology for our population that's been taken there.
Selection pressure is the key to this conversation.
So hold on, because and this is the issue that I was alluding to earlier, where there's a bunch of changes in definitions. It just seems like a word game. Because the last time I checked, like the most simple and most exact definition of evolution is and correct me if I'm wrong, the common descent of all life on Earth from a single ancestor, or common ancestor, as you guys might call it, via random, undirected mutations and natural selection. Right?
Stephen, that's not a simple definition. The simple definition is change of allele frequency over a population.
Well, we understand that.
So that's a simple definition. That's what evolution
guys,
is.
Everybody chill for a second.
Okay.
We understand that it's the changes of allele frequencies over time, but we understand as well the theory in full that we're talking about. That what we're criticizing is common descent. So I think everybody here understands that it's the changes of allele frequencies over time is going to lead to greater complexities down the line, and this is the reason why you have the diversity of life here on Earth. So,
saying greater complexity is a loaded phrase. What you really mean is
Eddie, hold on. I'm not finished saying what I'm saying. So, just because we're talking about change, that doesn't mean that we can therefore apply the changes that we're actually observing, small incremental changes, and then assume that the small incremental changes can lead to the greater complexities that we're seeing down the line. Because when you're looking at that, you're looking at certain things that require creative power, and we don't know any non-intended process that can build the same things that we're seeing, like metabolic pathways or anything like that, other than an intelligence. So that's the point. I mean, there's a burden of proof here that's being smuggled in by conflating everything by just saying change. Obviously, we're talking about common descent.
Yeah. Now, the definition that I gave, it's simple and it's very specific. It explains, it gives you the basic idea of what the mechanism is, right? Of the theory of evolution, right? That's what I'm talking about. One could simply say change over time, right? But change can be used in so much different contexts and used in so many different ways. So the definition that I just gave is the actual definition that explains the theory in short.
No,
right?
no. It is specific. It's change in allele frequency. If every generation you have 1% change in the allele frequency, or
that's
even
let's look at it for a second. Let's look at that for a second, though. Let's look at that for a second, because here's the thing about changes in sequences. I mean, we can do DNA tests, for example, to see who our father was, or who our mother was, or who we're related to. That's something that I don't think anybody would disagree with. But then when those differences in DNA start stretching to the point to where they're 95% or 5% different or 4% different, then you start seeing, an accumulation of changes that
require body changes as well. So I mean, it's a different thing. So just because we're
No,
talking about
paternity
changes,
tests aren't just about
just
how
because
similar
we're talking about
DNA
changes,
is.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you because you were interrupting me. What'd you say?
Paternity tests are not simply about how similar DNA is. There's a lot more to paternity tests, and you can take those paternity tests and you can actually trace it back, and you can actually connect different animals together that are related, including chimps, modern day chimps.
No, you can't. You can't really do it. You can't really do it by comparing anatomies of already established species. Like if I'm going to compare, they're chimpanzees who are
No, I was saying they correlate together simultaneously. Multiple fields correlate together. This is not a.
No, they don't correlate together. What's happening is that because we share the same base pairs, all of the animals on the planet, you're finding the similar sequences because these base pairs are being used billions of times over. But there's only guanine, thymine, cytosine, and adenine. So if that's being used billions of times over, and all of the organisms on the planet, that's the reason why you're not going to be surprised at similar sequences. But that would be the point, actually, though, because if minor differences and changes, you can compare that. But when you start comparing like the organisms that have completely different body plans, completely different brain functions, neurological patterns, you're coding for something. I mean, it's like the whole code for the organism is written completely different. So
yeah, if you're assuming that there was some giant leap, but that's not what evolution predicts. Evolution predicts small steps. You keep going back to it can explain these giant changes, and there are no giant changes.
The problem, no. There are giant changes over time, over millions of years. The small incremental changes will lead to a large change, right? But the problem is that burden of proof has
no large change to be explained. Evolution predicts small changes in between generations. You keep going back. You have to explain these giant changes. There are no giant changes.
Exactly. All we see is small changes. That's what evolution would expect. Evolution hasn't changed.
Yes.
Evolution hasn't
changed.
Evolution
predicts.
Eddie, you keep on interrupting. Stop it. That's exactly what we would expect. Small changes. But obviously, the differences between the lizards and the reptile and the amphibians and the fish and the mammals are very large differences, right? Those small changes accumulated to those large changes. Do you deny that?
That's exactly what macroevolution is.
Exactly. The small incremental changes lead to larger changes
the way you're presenting it is incorrect.
I have
there's
a
nothing
couple of
incorrect about that. I think you're sort of operating on a straw man, trying to say that we're saying that it's a large changes are going to happen all at once. We understand the theory, but the problem is that we're questioning the claim that the small incremental changes.
I don't think Eddie understands the
no
theory
evidence
itself, to be honest.
Can we talk about predictions? Because Hogtie still wants to address that because we've blown over that for a moment. So Hogtie, go for it.
Never mind.
Gio had some. Gio, I want to say Viva. Good to see you after.
Good to see you too, man.
4 years, I think, is the last time we spoke.
Yeah, something like that.
Sounds like you're still. Good to see you still plugging away at it. I did want to answer at least address the question about predictions. It's an interesting one because we do hear in discussion an awful lot about a good scientific theory as something that affords predictions that can be tested. And when they say predictions, usually mean an empirical, like some sort of an observation. And we kind of like to think of like if you were an expert in like paper airplane theory, and somebody could say, well, what would happen if I made the same type of paper airplane, but at the very back end of it, I sort of just put a little sort of the last half inch of paper, I bend it up a little bit. Well, what do you think would happen? So, well, when you throw it, it's going to go like this, and then when you bend the things up and you throw it, it's going to go up a little higher. Oh, why do you think that would happen? You know, those are the sort of reasonable and testable predictions that are kind of the hallmark of a successful scientific theory. In that case, an application to engineering, if you consider paper airplane making engineering.
Yep. And it's funny because, like, take, for example, what I do, or what I used to do or practice a lot was I used to create Android ROMs. What I will do is take vanilla Android and make tweaks to it to either make it better or add extra features and stuff like that. But this is the issue. When you change the basic code of that OS, it screws up everything, and then you have to literally tear down the whole thing and rebuild it from scratch and create something new. Yes, it still has the same framework of Android, but you added your own little twists to it. Like, for example, you might want to add like different transitions and stuff like that throughout the OS, right? Sometimes you run into issues, right? But at the end of the day, it's still Android at the end of the day. Nothing has changed really. You only made small changes to it. Now, the only reason why you're able to do that is because you have a mind and you can make predictions based on the knowledge that you have of programming or software engineering, right? Evolution, it's just a word game. It's like the article that MMA posted a while ago.
Who had asked the question about predictions? Who asked the question? Does anybody remember?
I did. I was one of them.
Okay.
I just asked what was like, because what happened was there was many speculation about what happened in the past from the present, and I said, well, what is the prediction from the present to the future?
Yeah.
And he got into transhumanism. But I'm like, that's beside the point. I'm asking about a natural process. Where is it going to eventually lead? Do you think that we'll start developing psychic powers? I don't know. I'm just throwing out things out there.
I see what you mean. That's actually when you'd asked that. That's why I thought, I'm going to come in and say something about that, because that's it's an interesting point. Because so what I was laying out with the paper airplane example was along the lines of what we usually mean when we say, well, this makes predictions. When you've got circumstances you can manipulate with your hands. And when you try to extend that to the logic of evolution, you say, well then, hey, does that mean that if we took a bunch of goats and we raised them all somewhere where there's snow, that this would happen? And generally speaking, that's not the way that evolution would make predictions, for two reasons. One, the more simple, is the time scales. That you'd say, well, if we did this with goats, if we fed them limes, but made them live in the snow, well, I bet they would do this after 10,000 generations. Well, how do you make those kind of predictions? Obviously, there's things they do with bacteria that they do those kind of things, but for the most part, no. We're not going to answer questions about the future of humanity by speculating about what we're going to be like 10,000 generations from now, and then sit back with a pencil and clipboard and wait for that to happen. The second reason...
But then you would just reap the benefits of saying that that's exactly what it would actually predict. Wouldn't that? I don't know. That's what I'm kind of hearing, but I'm not. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Well, I do want to get to the point of this. Is that because what you do here is you do hear people say, well, an advantage of evolutionary theory is that it makes successful predictions, whereas more theistic accounts don't make what you might call risky predictions. That is, I think somebody mentioned here before that a theistic account of creation accounts for anything. You can come up with any imagined creature, and well, why does a giraffe have a long neck? Well, because God wanted giraffes to have a long neck, or whatever creator you envision. So
I disagree with that. I would disagree with that. I mean, we wouldn't be looking at it from the same perspective that an evolutionist would, anyways, where you would be expecting intermediates. That's not what what we would be trying to be looking for to try to show progression. But we would look at it from a different perspective. Okay, well, depending on the environment or depending on the locations, well, this is what we would probably find.
Well, maybe you would. That does not at all follow as a consequence of a theistic creationist account.
Well, of course, I'm not talking about a theistic. I'm not talking about a theistic creation account. I'm always talking about ID. So just for somebody that's looking at it from a creative perspective, that's what I would be looking for.
Well,
I mean,
okay.
I would, just like any machine that we make. If you send something to Mars, it's going to have to be able to conform to that environment, to be able to function in that environment. So we would expect that polar bears being up there in the north, or certain like snakes or whatever being able to survive in the deserts. I mean, so those are the type of predictions that we would make.
Well, those aren't predictions. That's a post-dictive explanation. That's not predicting anything. That's saying, because your theory is established based on these observations. So you go out and you see snakes in the desert, and you see furry polar bears out in the snow, and you see penguins in the Antarctic, and you say, well, how do we explain that? So you come up with this theory of intelligent design. You can't then say, well, intelligent design would predict polar bears to live in the snow and snakes to live in the desert, because those were the things that were foundational that motivated you to come up with that sort of an account. Which is why
one could say the same, but
You misunderstood. If we're looking at things from a creative perspective, right, then we understand that whatever devices that we build, they're going to have to function a certain way, right? And we know this based on where we send our instruments. If we're sending them somewhere else, this is what we expect. So if we're going to predict by looking at nature, we would expect the same thing. We would expect, okay, if these things were created, they would function the same way or operate the same way. And so that would be the point of what we were bringing up earlier, because we can make the same predictions based on what we're seeing inside of nature. It's not about the predictions. It's about knowing what the mechanisms can actually do.
Okay, well, the thing is, he asked about predictions. So
What
I see is that people. What I'm responding to is what I think Gio is responding to also is that you hear people who support evolution make this claim. They say evolution, and all I'm doing is just that's the background. Is that people who support evolution will say, well, the advantage that evolution has over any creation account is that evolution makes predictions, makes testable predictions, and those predictions are tested, and it turns out they come true. But this is not something that's available to other creation accounts, and I speak of that very, very generally, because other creation accounts are perfectly post-dictive. They can just say, oh, well, this is the way things are. And what I think Gio's saying is that, well, wait a minute, if we keep hearing from evolutionists that, well, an advantage of evolution is that it makes predictions, and these are testable predictions, and they have been tested, well, can you give us an example of a prediction that came from evolution that was tested and turns out, like, does that not seem to you like a great question?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah, actually, you can give those examples. I mean, the chromosome number 2 is a perfect example. That was predicted by evolutionary theory before we
was not.
Test it.
Absolutely was not.
Actually, I'm talking about the future. I'm talking about specifically the future. Also, I just wanted to chime in real quick. I've just been kind of silent about it. Is that first of all, you guys say that, the creation has a certain type of problem that, because it can multiply any type of explanation and defy some sort of Occam's razor, as you probably would put it. But then you turn around and you say, well, it doesn't take any risky business, but then you don't turn around and then tell us the predictions that will happen from 10,000 generations from now.
I'm trying to.
You're trying to have your cake and eat it,
No,
or you're merely, it's a juxtaposition of theism itself.
Yeah, no, I'm really.
What it appears is happening to me, honestly, what it
trying
looks
to
like
give you an
is that-
example of a prediction.
Chromosome
2 is not a good example, but I can
Hold on. So this is the way how I see it, right?
Okay.
If a biologist who ascribes himself to evolution uses science, the scientific method, and makes a discovery or makes a prediction, right? It's put under the category of an evolutionary prediction, right? If an ID guy or someone who's of a creation mindset makes a prediction, he's gonna put it under that category. But this is the thing. Like, I think the issue is just the paradigm in general. It's just this closed, almost dogmatic paradigm where it's like yes, it's dominated by an evolutionary mindset, but I thought science was supposed to be open. I thought,
Yeah. See,
you get what I'm saying? That's not the case.
No, I'm sorry.
It's not.
I'm sorry.
Science-minded, no.
Should I just give up?
Hold on, let me finish. I want to explain something else.
We should let you finish.
For
Okay.
Gio. Okay, Gio. When they say predictions, they don't necessarily mean predictions as in they're going to predict that, cats' tails are going to get 2 feet longer in the next 200 years or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
What they're talking about, prediction-wise, is that they'll formulate a theory on how, let's just say you take some of the genome from one particular bacteria and put it into another, right? And
no, you're not even close.
Yeah, no.
No.
Let me give you an example of
It is not at all what's meant by prediction.
Hold on. I want to respond really quick, guys.
All right.
I mean, just I'm going to be really quick. I'm going to try to be. I just feel like the responses that I get from evolutionists are sort of, hypocritical, because when you're really looking at what they're saying is predictions, it's more so like they're looking at patterns that would be convenient, and then they just dub it, and like evolution, would predict that. I mean, even if you look at Tiktaalik, for example, how would that necessarily therefore follow evolution was behind it? Because it's known that when you're looking at the different intermediates, the deeper you go into the fossil record, that you can speculate where they're going to be or what they ate over the environments because of the layers that they were actually in. So, that's something that you would probably expect. That's what anybody would expect.
Well, that's what a prediction is. That's what a prediction is. It's something you would expect from your theoretical account.
But the point is that I'm trying to make, just because you can find something in a certain environment, you expect something to be in certain environments, because of where they're eating or what that environment would be, water environment or rainforest, whatever. It doesn't necessarily therefore follow evolution was behind it.
No, it doesn't.
Follow because you would expect to find a species.
That's not the point of a prediction.
I understand that. That's actually the exact point. That's not the point of a prediction. You gotta. Where are you connecting it to the prediction? That's the point.
That's the difference. That's the difference between a mundane prediction and a risky prediction. Again, I've been straining to give you an example of a prediction. The first thing I'm saying is I got to try to move away from this idea that if you want to make a prediction about evolution, what necessarily the camp you're looking into is, so are humans going to, how are we going to be different 10,000 years from now? That's not a useful prediction because it's untestable by its nature. So remember, the thing you're looking for in terms of a prediction, basically take all the observations. Remember, we're talking about observations, doing science, making observations. And there's all the observations that you've made so far, that is up to the point when you construct your theory. And then there's observations that you haven't made yet. They're future observations. So it's not about these events. It's not about whether humans are going to sprout wings or eyes in the back of their head or whatever a million years from now. It's about what observations are going to happen. That's why I use the example of when you throw the airplane. You can make an observation about throwing an airplane, and then from the theory that you construct based on your history of observations, if you now say, well, I'm going to make an observation that I've never made before, but I'm going to first make a prediction. And it might be a really mundane one. I intentionally chose one that, if I bend the little flaps up on the back, the nose is going to lift up and it's going to go up. You're going to go, of course that's what's going to happen. But that is exactly what a scientific prediction is. It is an expectation, something that of course you're going to expect this. That is, of course.
Can I ask you a question then?
But isn't that presupposing?
Just really briefly, can I ask you a question? Then, is there any predictions? Is there a specific prediction that you can make, Hogtie, that can show the intermediates leading to a greater complexity? Because, isn't that the point? We're talking about the diversity of life here on Earth. So, I think that any predictions that are going to coincide with a mechanism, that's the direction that they're going to need to go.
You guys are really hooked up on the complexity thing, and I would more so say specialization more than complexity.
Well, no, not necessarily complexity. I'm talking about anatomical features specifically.
I would say, I think Tiktaalik is a great example of a prediction, because nobody observed Tiktaalik. This is my point about how what you got to do is take your observations from observations that you made in the past versus observations that you might make in the future. And nobody had ever observed Tiktaalik. And then somebody said, well, you know what? If we went up to these islands and dug down to this layer, we're going to make observations when we get there. Well, what's your guess for what these observations are going to be? And they had sketches, they had predictions for the type of thing that they would find. And not only did they find the thing, the very famous sort of Tiktaalik-looking thing, but they found hundreds of remnants of those and some intact specimens.
And what if they don't find those
things? I want to make my point here. That is exactly what a prediction is. It's not a crystal ball forecast about what's going to happen in the future. It is a specific prediction about an observation that you will be able to make.
Well, I want to clarify. I want to point out that before this, you said that was not a good prediction, but I still say it's not a good prediction just because of what I said earlier. In the environments, you're going to expect that to be there. I would expect it to be there as well, just like I told you.
Why would you?
Just like I told you earlier about the machines that we're sending to Mars and so on. We would expect that from a creation perspective, that certain functions or certain abilities are going to be necessary for the environment. And when you look in the fossil record in those layers, you know where to expect where they're going to be, or what they were eating, or what the environment was like, depending on where those layers are. But there are
let me address that.
Since we're on the fossil record, okay, you know what? I'm not going to change the topic because I was going to talk about.
I'm going to make some interesting observations here from Karl Popper. Karl Popper was talking about demarcation and different things about the predictional factors of science itself. But however, there's a big problem here, is that science is supposed to predict how something is going to occur into the future. Like when we think about relativity, right? We think about when we have a solar eclipse, we're going to know that the light is going to bend around and we're going to see new stars. And even though Einstein had no way of predicting those particular future events to happen, these things did come true through mathematics and showing other ways of doing that. And the problem was, he did prove, gravitational lensing, other effects that happen within, and there was no way to predict that. But he did predict that. But that's what science is. It's supposed to predict the future events and its uniformity of that. But the problem is that evolution doesn't do that. It doesn't do that because it's going to.
Did you not just listen to everything Hogtie just said?
I did listen.
Example of what you're asking for.
I'm listening. Trust me. He's saying that you can make observations in short steps within, and then you guys are going to the past. That's fine. I'm not
the past. He gave a specific example of when a prediction was made. If we go to this place, based upon the evolutionary theory, we will find
what I said about that. The problem is that, did you hear what I just said about that? If we can both make the same prediction, it doesn't doesn't therefore follow that evolution was behind it. If we're predicting the same thing,
he asked how you can make the prediction based upon a creationist model, and you haven't given an example of how you could.
I just gave you exactly the reason why. We would expect certain organisms to be in a certain place in the fossil record, and they would be able to function a certain way in that environment because of what that environment is. So the fact that we were to see Tiktaalik is exactly what we would expect.
No, but how? Connect those dots.
Why would you say based on what? I just told you, based on the fact that what the environment is like. I'll repeat this.
You would have predicted when
we send. You have to explain that. You can't just throw it out there.
Eddie, you got to stop interrupting because you've been doing that since you were born. You got to stop, okay? Like I was bringing up earlier, I mean, when we send machines to Mars, we build those machines to be able to survive in that environment. So we would expect, we're looking at things from a creative perspective. So we would ask ourselves, okay, if things were created, what would we expect if we go look in this environment? And we would expect those organisms to be able to be built a certain way to survive in those environments. And if we're looking in the fossil record and we know where the different organisms are going to be or the environments are going to be based on the layers of the fossil record, well then it's not going to be surprising that we're going to see Tiktaalik where it's at.
Okay, well why not a six-legged? So you get this is going to take us nowhere, I know it, because you're basically asserting that it just logically follows from your, from ID or whatever creation account you want to go with. It just, well, of course we were going to find that thing there, and we're saying, well, how? Well, it's obvious it was going to be there. No, there's no logical connection between.
No, I think what I'm doing is I'm comparing it to. I think what I'm doing is I'm comparing it to what you're saying to show that we can't go anywhere with this because that's exactly what's happening on the evolution side when we're making predictions. I mean, we're not. Why does it follow that therefore evolution was behind it?
Okay.
That doesn't necessarily
follow. You keep saying that, and
you
every
can
time you say
interpret
it,
the
I say
evolutionary
you're right.
model, and
it doesn't
you can
prove
look for
evolution.
anything. You can look for anything that may be convenient for it, but just because you interpret things based on your presuppositions doesn't mean it follows that evolution was behind
it. That misrepresents how that process works. This is what I mean by about risky predictions versus sort of mundane things. So for example, suppose if one of my cats is sort of swollen, and I was going to say going to have kittens, is swollen in the belly, and they're getting bigger, and it's like, well, this cat's now going to give birth to something. what, under your theoretical account of the world, what do you think is going to come out of this cat? Because I'll tell you, under evolutionary theory, I would expect kittens to come out of the cat. So if I get kittens out of that cat, does that prove evolution's true? And the answer is, of course not. Because a biblical literalist creationist is going to tell me that the Bible says your cat's going to have kittens. Any ID theorist is going to say, well, your cat's going to have kittens. So it doesn't matter what view you have. That's such a ground ball prediction. We're all going to be right about the specific prediction. So it doesn't actually give any of us a leg up in saying, well, this is why our theory is better in a predictive sense than any other. So I accept that. I accept that truth that when there's a mundane prediction, and every theory points in the same direction for that particular future observation, and that future observation turns out to be exactly what the predictions were, so what?
Okay.
But the problem is that not every prediction in evolution follows. I mean, there's been failed predictions that are really, really damaging. I mean, I know you've had to have heard me bring this up before, but the Cambrian era. I mean, the Cambrian era, you got most of the all the major phylum right there at the bottom. Only thing that you see below there is the stromatolites, or the cyanobacteria. So, I mean, where are you going to... There's a huge leap from there. There's nothing below that, so you see no progression. If the claim is the deeper you go in the fossil record, the less complex they are, and the more primitive they are, and at the bottom of the fossil record, you're seeing all the major phylum there, then it's the prediction is confirmed to be incorrect.
No, well, again, the prediction isn't about complexity. The prediction is about specialization.
I'm not talking about complexity. I'm talking about all the major phylum being there. The major phylum supposedly progressed. So so I guess it would follow. You're right that the complexity wouldn't be there. But I think the point is that the major phylum are there at the bottom of the fossil record, and it's speculated that they evolved, right?
Okay, but there are no rabbits or horses or people.
Well, I don't agree that the fossil record shows progression. I don't agree with that. I think that the fossil record was the end result of different, larger events that may have taken place simultaneously, or maybe it could have been the global flood. So I don't agree that it shows that. I'm just saying that if we just ignore the global flood and we look at it from an evolutionary perspective, it doesn't follow an evolutionary model. The honest answer is it doesn't make a bit of sense. And at the bottom of the fossil record, if all the phylum are there, then you can't say that they evolved because you're not seeing anything else below that but stromatolites.
Well, then that's absent information. That doesn't mean that there's any prediction that's wrong.
No. The point is that's not absent information. That's actually available.
Doesn't help anybody.
Yeah, but that's actually available information. That's not absent information. If we know that the bottom of the fossil record, the major phylum are there, that's available information. You only see things after that, and that's only 12% of the geological time scale. The Precambrian is 88%, and we know nothing about that. All we see is the stromatolites. So I mean, it's not like, well, we're waiting for more fossils in the future. We have the fossils available at the bottom of the fossil record.
Yeah. Well, I've not heard you pitch that before. I mean, you'd have to send me something or re-explain it now or whatever. But what you're talking about, I mean, it's unfortunate because again, you're taking us away from Gio's question there. But I don't know how what you're saying runs afoul.
I'm on Gio's question.
Sorry, of a necessary prediction. I mean,
didn't you say earlier, just a few minutes ago, that Tiktaalik was not a good prediction? It's not a risky prediction?
It is. It's a risky prediction.
It wasn't a risky prediction, and then he moved on and just talk about something else.
Well, I wanted to add something before you guys can even have an opportunity. But the issue here, So I'm going to use a very mundane thing, because you guys were talking about the Mars rover and other things like that. Before NASA even launches up there, we predict not events that actually occur. Before we observe them, they can actually send a telemetry to that particular planet by orbiting or other things like that. And they can actually, these events have not been predicted. We just know through the mathematics that these future events can happen. And then based on real-time observation, we can actually see that. But what I have the issue with is that 10,000 generations, there's no even riskier predictions there. There's just like, well, there is in the past. Okay. The past. Okay. I'm not. But another thing, too, I wanted to bring up real quick with the programmer is that before you run a code, You can see a code is going to work. You can make predictions before something happens. You can do that. But why is evolutionists or certain types of people within the camp, I don't want to say evolutionists because it's can be condescending, but it somehow is remissed. It's dismissed. It's like, well, we don't do that. Well,
I was attempting to explain that earlier on, but then we started talking about Android for some odd reason. But
but the Android, when somebody makes programs, you can look, if you know code enough, you can look in there and predict and go, well, you know what, this might crash. And then there's predictive software that can run through it and go, okay, well, you have this problem with this particular code. I'm not a programmer, obviously. But I'm saying, but in the same time, but why is evolution somehow is saying it's not like, well, we can't do that?
I can tell you. I would love to tell you. Can I tell you? Well, okay. It was the second reason. The first reason I gave was the easier one, and that's the easier one to understand, and that's the time scales, which of course is not such a big problem for things like bacteria. But the other problem, which is a little more heady, but when you think about it, it's consistent with everything else we see in nature, and that is the notion of chaotic systems or nonlinear dynamical systems. So let's look at a more familiar example, like the weather. I want to compare the weather to, since we're talking about computer programs, let's compare the weather to a basic, like, 20-line computer program. You write a little program where you put in, like, whatever, how many people you had dinner with and how much each people should split it up and who's going to leave the tip. Really simple. You can look at that program on paper without even having a computer handy. And if you understand the language, you can look at it and say, oh, so it's going to ask for this input, it's going to do this, it's going to do that, and it's going to do this. But in these circumstances, it's going to create an error, but as long as you put in this right information, this is what's going to happen, and no surprises will follow. But with the weather, can you tell me what the weather will be like in Saskatchewan on June 4th of 2018? And you can't.
I think when you get closer to the particular date, you could.
Right. Exactly,
you can make some sort of speculation, but
that is a feature. Yeah, you answered my question. That is a feature. Chaos theory, right? Nonlinear dynamical system. That is a feature of chaos, and every system we see in nature. It's like how they can predict solar flares. Well, they can tell you they can predict solar flares, and they can predict coronal mass ejections, but there's no space scientists that can point to a particular corner of the moon and say, corner of the moon. I'm tired. Plus it doesn't have corners. That was an odd thing to say. Particular place on the sun.
That's not science anymore.
What, coronal mass ejections is not science?
No. I'm talking about if you're injecting non-predictive measurements into the equation, then it's no longer science.
Okay, but what if it turns out that the nature of reality, at least some parts of it, like nature itself, like the sun's solar flares, is that there's sort of general predictability, like there's general trends to things, like the sun's going to throw off more solar flares this year, but it's truly unpredictable. That it's going to be that particular location, that particular latitude and longitude on the sun where that's going to come from. Or what if it turns out that we know, well, tomorrow it's going to be hot in the morning and humid, and then the cumulus clouds are going to come up, and there's going to be a heck of a thunderstorm tomorrow night. But exactly which cloud at which point in space is going to create a lightning strike with which tower in the city? We don't know. What if that is the nature of reality, that some things are simply predictable in their general character and the general trend, but the very precise, specific things about it aren't predictable? Would you call it science if somebody did come up with a bunch of crystal ball predictions? Of course not. Science is about creating models of actual reality as best as possible. And it turns out that for many of these natural systems, they're chaotic in their nature, and our best models of chaotic systems turn out to be models that make general predictions and remain silent on the very, very super minute details.
So hold on.
Yeah, Gio, can I ask you a serious question? I mean, you keep throwing out this. You keep throwing out this. I need you to give me a testable claim of 10,000 years from now what humans are going to be like. I mean, how is that remotely at all testable? Is what we're saying here. I mean, Hogtie is trying to explain it to you. It's like, what's testable about making a claim about 10,000 years from now? We can't test it. I mean, I could just make it up. I mean, what would be the point?
Hold on. I think an example is general relativity and all the predictions that it's made, right?
Yeah,
it's the most tested theory ever. Einstein predicted gravity waves, for example. He didn't have the equipment to figure all of that stuff out. All he used was his brain and, well, mathematics. And I mean, to me, that's amazing. That's amazing. So,
if you believe it.
Huh?
He says, but if you believe that one, I have some doubts about the particular gravity wave thing, but that's my issue. So I just didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, it's cool. I mean, I believe I think it's just situational when it comes to certain things. I think we can predict. With the knowledge and even the equipment that we have, we can predict certain things down to the T. You get what I'm saying? And even when it comes to programming, you really cannot completely predict what's going to happen next based on the code that you inject. There's really no guarantee. And the funny thing is that the coding is just instructions that you're giving the computer. So if you put in coding that's crappy, the computer's just going to follow your instructions. So it's not the computer's fault your program doesn't work.
We understand that. Can you tell us what the weather is going to be like in June 4th in Saskatchewan, June 4th of 2018? And of course you can't. So would you then say that the weather...
I'm not disputing that. I'm not disputing that.
I know. So then you said, would you then say that the weather is something not understood? We simply cannot have a naturalistic explanation for weather because we can't.
I think that's a bad comparison, though. Because I think that there could be
but a good comparison because I'm not comparing the weather to evolution. I'm reflecting exactly on what he just said about how, well, in this field of science you can make specific predictions, but if you can't do that, well, then it's not real science. So I'm addressing that specific point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm not denying there's chaos theory involved. I'm just showing particular examples. I'm sorry to interrupt, guys, but go ahead.
Yeah, it's just one of those things where it's just situational. There's just certain things where even at first we might not be able to make predictions that are very precise, right? But eventually we can get to that point, right? Through, as you said, observations, testing, and everything that we do in the scientific method, right? At the end of the day, sometimes we really don't even need the physical observations for certain things in order to make strong predictions, risky but strong predictions. And a perfect example of that is general relativity. It's a perfect example. So yes, your example for the sun, yeah, we can completely predict where the solar flares are going to happen and all of that stuff. No, like I get that. I'm not disputing that, but I just feel
so
like it's just situational. That's all.
I think the point is that if Einstein predicted the gravity waves, then obviously it's able to be predicted. You can expect something that's going to happen, and scientific theories can make those predictions.
Yeah. I'm vaguely saying that. If he can somehow do it, well, I'm not saying it has to be correct, because that's the only one up, and that's what I'm saying, is that how do we distinguish who gets the one up? As you know, because remember Hogtie was saying that anybody can use any type of vague analogies or anything and come to the same prediction. So or to the same, conclusion as well. But I'm just like, well, how do one person over another, what model gives a better
It just depends on what you affiliate yourself with at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Realistically, the science is the method.
Well, then it just becomes subjective. That's fine. That's fine. I'm not dismissing that. I'm becoming more less I've become a little less. I think Hogtie is now starting to realize I'm a little bit more. What do you call it? A lot more not as radicalized as I used to be. But these are why I'm asking these questions, because I'm trying to gauge what sort of tools do we use to gauge whether a worldview is correct philosophically or scientifically. So it depends.
For me personally, I would, and I give everybody my word, I would actually accept evolution as in common descent being true, if I can only figure out if the mechanism can actually do what's claimed, down the long run. But I've talked to a lot of people over that, and just talking about predictions, it's just not very convincing, because, like I said, when I look at it, the same predictions can be made that a creationist can make, and if we're looking at things according to our presuppositions, that seems like that's really the only thing that's happening. So I want to know. I want to know if small changes lead to the big changes.
Yeah, that's there are two. True, if you don't mind, there are two things I'd like to say about that, and one is that I have heard you say before about how that what you really need is, what was it, proof of the mechanism, or what would you say? Can you just repeat that phrase again?
I want to know if the mechanism can do what's claimed, in the long run as a common descent.
That's kind of, in terms of scientific inquiry, that's kind of ass backwards through the cat door, because the first thing you need to do is to demonstrate that the phenomenon takes place. So for example, if you claimed to have psychic abilities so that you could know what the winning lottery numbers were every week, obviously we'd all be skeptical of that claim, and we might ask you something, well, how does that work? And you might give us a theoretical account that includes a mechanistic explanation for how you're able to do this, and it may involve making hats out of tinfoil, or who knows what your theoretical account is. And if we just say, well, there's nothing to see here because I don't believe his theoretical account, and just walk away from it, what we've done is we've missed the first important step, and that is to confirm that the phenomenon actually takes place. And if it turns out that you go ahead and make a prediction that week, and you get 1 out of 6 numbers right, or 2 out of 6 numbers correct, and you say, there, see, it's not a perfect system, but I got a couple right. Well, then what we have to do is compare it to the base rate, like what our expectations were under the theory that you don't have any special powers to predict the lottery numbers.
Right. Yeah, but what if you predicted all the numbers?
I think the problem is that.
Then what that shows.
Let me respond briefly, please, because I know that other people are going to want to jump in. It seems like, so I just want to respond really quick. I think that the only way that we can see if it can happen, or see if it happens, is by knowing if the mechanism can actually do it, right? Because we can't say that it has happened before without knowing if something can make it happen, right? So I mean. That's the reason why it's just not a satisfactory answer to compare the homologies or the similarities of species that you're looking at in the fossil record. Because that's declaring evolution was behind it is not the same thing as saying that, well, the small changes were actually behind those big changes.
No, and that's what I'm saying. That's exactly that. That would be science backwards. I might even be generous to call it science backwards, because let me extend the example of the lottery ticket thing. Okay, so what happens, as Stephen asked, what happens if I say, well, I don't really believe your story about, or like maybe you say, let's come up with something really crazy. Let's say that the reason you say that time traveling aliens. I don't believe in time travel. I don't believe in aliens. So for you to tell me that you're able to know what the lottery ticket numbers, the winning lottery numbers are, because of your time travel aliens, I don't believe the mechanism. I would really struggle to get some proof from you that these time travel aliens really exist. But therefore, I'm going to dismiss your claim that the truth of the matter is you're able to predict these numbers. So, okay, what happens then? I'm skeptical of your proposed mechanism, but should I dismiss the factual assertion that you have the ability to predict the lottery numbers? No, we should test that. You always test the state of affairs first.
Right, but then how do we test it? We test it.
Okay, well, in this case, let me do the lottery number thing. Let me do the lottery number. So let's say you do come up with, you get all 6 numbers right. And I'm like, well, okay, that's amazing. That's 1 in 14 million. And I said, well, no, hang on. I'll do it again for next week's draw. Well, now it's 1 in 14 million squared. So now I'm pretty seriously convinced that some phenomenon is taking place. I don't have to accept your theoretical account. Now what I have to do is say, well, what other predictions would emerge from that particular theoretical account? Now, there may be another theoretical account, and that is that you have a cousin that works for the Lottery Commission, and the whole thing is a fraud, by the way, and your cousin's been feeding you the numbers. Right? Now, that's also a bit of a stretch, not as big of a stretch as time travel aliens, but that's another possibility. Under that theoretical account, it means that at some point you're going to take a secret phone call or get a piece of email or something. So I set up surveillance, and I find out, yep, sure enough, Thursday afternoon, you get an email from your cousin that has the winning numbers.
Now,
right?
question: What if no one messaged him the numbers, or he doesn't have a family member or a friend or anybody he doesn't know? He's not affiliated with anyone that works in the organization.
Okay, well, who cares? Who cares? When it's your turn to come up with a hypothetical, you go ahead and you run with the hypothetical. Let me bring mine in for landing. Okay. The point is that if the fact that in this case, that my example, the state of affairs is you do have a special power to predict what the lottery numbers are. There are two different theoretical accounts for how that might be. And just because I dismiss your first theoretical account as being something that I can't get my head around, or for whatever reason I dismiss it, because it's inconsistent with other things I believe or whatever else, means that I'm going to dismiss the phenomenon itself. It means I missed the opportunity to engage in the investigation, right? So obviously we confirm that the phenomenon exists. Then we start to look and we surveil. And I look and you get an email from your cousin. Or let's say you don't get an email from your cousin, but instead one night the sky goes green and clouds come in and there's a UFO comes down and one of them hands you a little ticket with the numbers on it, right? Right, so you don't investigate. You cannot. My point here is you cannot dismiss the phenomenon because of your resistance to believe the proposed mechanism.
But the problem is that doesn't, the phenomena, I mean, what phenomena can we connect with evolution? I mean, I don't see where your point is leading. So, I mean, what are the phenomena that we can't dismiss?
Hold on, so let me...
The fundamental point of disagreement, whether or not humans and apes have a common ancestor, or humans are a type of ape. That's...
Well, just I think that's
the
different thing, though. Isn't that just like a claim? I mean, because how do we know that we had a common ancestor? I mean, because we can't just look at some organism a long, long time ago and then just like declare it. Well, this looks more similar to us, so therefore, this is our common ancestor. I mean, that's what I'm saying. It's just like
that's not how it's
declaring it. We're just declaring things, and it seems like this to me. It seems like this is what it is. We're using really mainly our imagination to connect dots. So if I come in with a presupposition, I can picture it in my head, like, progression. But that doesn't tell me as if, evolution actually did it.
Sure, and that's not how it happens. That is not at all the process for how the conclusion was arrived at.
But isn't that the exact same analogy? That's the analogy you were giving me, right?
No, it's first.
It pretty much comes down to that.
Ask you a question, Hogtie.
No, that's the way religion approaches this subject. That's not the way science.
Look, that's not the way that religion approaches the subject. We're not talking about religion. We're talking about evolution. And I understand how science works. That's the reason why I agree with him. That's not the way that science works. But this is the way it seems like evolution works, and this is the reason why I can't accept it. I mean, with other theories, like Einstein's theory of relativity,
predictions. That's how evolution works, and also is false Bible predictions.
Eddie, you're always bringing things like that up. What testable predictions can you bring up?
Yeah, the evolutionary thing.
You better let him answer.
Okay, yeah. I just want to ask a question afterwards.
Yeah, Antonio, you can go next, but I just want to hear Eddie because he seems to be making shots, so maybe he's got something he'd like to bring to the table.
Yeah, no, I mean, Darwinian evolution has made several predictions. I mean, just one was the fact that there are two kinds of whales. There's whales with teeth, and there's whales with balines. It was predicted long ago that we would find a transitional whale that, once that existed, had both teeth and baleen. And that was found. And that was something that could not have been predicted by creation, by any kind of creation science, or it wouldn't make sense. It only makes sense.
Well, what whales? Because we already know that certain whales have teeth. So I mean, I don't know what you're talking about. You got to be a little bit more specific here.
Evolutionary theory predicts that there must be if whales with teeth and balines had a common ancestor, there must be a whale that has teeth and baleen. Even though there's none that exists now, it predicted that we would find it in the fossil record, and we did.
Okay, but that's not really a prediction. I mean, how is that a prediction for it? And first of all, who cares? I mean, they have teeth. It doesn't mean anything.
First off, it is definitely a prediction, because before that prediction was made, no one had made the observation of a whale with mixed denture. And then after the prediction was made, they found fossils of whales with mixed denture. And at the depth and with the other same morphological features that were of a more generalized whale type as opposed to modern specialized whales. So it is exactly the definition of what a prediction is.
Well, no. First of all, I would like to see an article for that. And the second thing, based on what you guys are telling me, that is not necessarily a prediction for evolution as in common descent. I mean, just because you can find something else that you can put in there as an intermediate doesn't necessarily
Let's bring
mean
the goalposts back to where they were.
Thank you very much.
Over there.
Eddie, I can't hear him. Eddie, when you overtalk him like that, I can't hear him. Can you go again, Hogtie?
Oh, I was going to say, let's put the goalposts back where they were. You can shift them later.
Well, there's no goalposts. There's no shifting the goalposts.
It is because
it's coming back to exactly what I'm saying. Remember what I was saying earlier about the apes? Let's just say that we can find an ape a long time ago that looks very similar to us, right? Let's just say that we can find an ape a long time ago. Just because it looks similar, that doesn't therefore mean that we can declare that it was our common ancestor. And that's exactly what you're doing right here.
And nobody does that. Nope.
You're doing the same thing right here with the whale bones, with the whale teeth, and you're declaring that because this one looks similar, therefore it came from it. This was already dealt with like 20 minutes ago.
No.
So what's the difference?
Isn't that it? Yeah, it is.
I'll tell you, this is actually one of the, having been doing this conversation for a while, this is one of the things that we get from one of those creationists or ID proponents or whatever else, is the presentation that the way that conclusions are arrived at for people who accept evolution. The idea here is that, well, they look at this one thing and they say, oh, well, obviously man came from monkeys. And I hear this all the time where people say, oh, well, you look at this similarity and then you conclude evolution's true, and there's no way that proves that. Or you look at genetic similarity and then you say, well, the evolution must be true. Well, that doesn't prove that. And you notice every time, and again, it's hard to tell sometimes, like whether or not when people interrupt or speak at the same time that you can hear it. But true, every time that you said something like, well, that doesn't prove evolution, I said, while you were saying that, I go, yep, you're right, it doesn't. I always agree whenever we're talking about a single observation. So let's go back to the whales, right? So with the mixed denture, the baleen versus conical teeth, there's no whale alive today that has both. They're very specialized. They have conical teeth, which are really good for eating fish, and then there's the baleens that are really good for straining these little critters.
Yeah,
and there's no creature that does both.
Plankton, I believe it is.
Plankton, yeah.
I say critters because I'm not a biologist. Nor have I ever claimed to have a PhD in biology. I don't want that out there that I've ever said I have a PhD in biology. Never made that claim.
It's also krill. Coming from Steve, hangout, really?
I saw that.
I don't know why he attached that to me. That was really weird the way that he did that.
It wasn't you. I know it wasn't you.
No, it was.
As soon as he said it, as soon as the other guy said it, you went, "Oh, really?" Because you'd never heard it before, and that was fair. I just.
I'm saying, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised to find anything, more of the same thing, more of the same variety. 99% of the species are dead. But I mean, we can't just find a species that looks similar and just declare, well.
But we don't. That's not what
I know. You're saying it's a prediction. I get what you're trying to say.
Right, it's a prediction.
You're saying that's a prediction, but the prediction is just, it's off because is it really a prediction? I mean, we're going to expect to find more if 99% of the species are gone and extinct. I mean, we see the same thing.
That is a prediction. Because it's a prediction that logically follows from the theory. So we have these things that are.
But that's the problem. I'm not finished with what I'm trying to say, though.
Okay, sorry.
That's the problem. That's the problem, though, because the prediction doesn't necessarily logically follow from the theory. It doesn't logically follow that, therefore, common descent was behind it. I mean, how do we know that common descent was behind it? I mean, I could just sit over here and say that they were all three species were therefore created at once. I mean, who's right and who's wrong? The one that says, well, I'm finding an intermediate here, therefore, it doesn't follow.
Okay, that's the goalpost shift. What you're doing, because what you asked him for was a prediction from the theory. What that means is that you're saying, if the theory, and specifically when I'm talking about evolution, I'm talking about common ancestry specifically, if the view that all extant whales actually came from a more generalized, less specialized common ancestor, then give us an example of a prediction. If that's true, show us an observation that hasn't been made, and then they made this prediction, and then now that observation was made. Give us an example of that. So he gives you an example of, well, look, we've got whales that either have conical teeth or they have balines, because they have totally different, feeding styles. But if they really came from a common ancestor, necessarily there must have been something out there with more generalized teeth. They weren't specifically conical, they weren't specifically baleen. There must have been, or mixed denture or something like that. So that's a specific prediction. And then after they made the prediction, they found an ancient animal that had that. Does that prove that evolution is true? No, there may be other possible accounts for it. But you asked him for a prediction, and he was able to handily provide you with one. Then you turned around and said, yeah, but that doesn't prove evolution. If you asked him to use whale denture as an example to prove evolution true, well, then he failed, but that's not what you asked him. You asked him for a prediction, and he provided one quite handily.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the point, though. The point is that I'm asking for common descent. That's the whole entire point of this discussion. Like, I want to. He's saying that, well, this is what, and correct me if I'm wrong, Eddie, but you were using this as an example to say, well, this is the difference between science and religion, right?
No, yes, well, sort of. My point was, and you made a point earlier on about how religion is not open to change or open to, I forget how you put it. I tried to interrupt, but I wasn't successful. But you mentioned something about this, about how, anyways, about how evolutionary scientists are not open to change. And, what I was trying to demonstrate is that evolution meets the criteria of the solid theory because it has these predictive qualities. Not only that, but it's falsifiable. You can actually falsify these predictions that evolution makes. You can find that's what you were saying.
Yeah, no, that's what you were saying, and that was the point. That's the problem. I mean, we would make the same types of well, maybe not this prediction. I'd have to admit, maybe this specific type of prediction, but we would predict. I mean, some of the same things that the evolutionists would predict. And this prediction right here, I mean, I want to know, how does this follow, therefore, an evolutionary model, as in common descent? Well, because that's what I'm interested in knowing about.
Hold on. Okay.
Well, I haven't spoken for a while.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I did put on the side.
Well, Antonio wanted to actually speak right here. Antonio actually wanted to speak right here, but yeah. I hope that we're getting that, because that's what I want to know. I mean, how does?
I'll be very quick.
Okay, well, I'm talking already, and I should have let Antonio speak. So go ahead, Antonio.
Okay, I just had a question for Hogtie. There's a mechanism for evolution that's said to be, already testable, that, something that we can practically access now. When you brought up your lottery example, that particular example seems to be an example that's more practically testable and accessible within a smaller range of a window. Now, when we're talking about evolution, that seems to be like smaller changes over time. So the window seems to be a lot bigger and a lot more difficult and a lot less practical to access. I just want to get your take on that.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think I did what a lot of people do when they talk about evolution. They want to sort of compare it to other fields of science. Remember, I opened with the example of a paper airplane, where you and I could sit around one afternoon and do literally hundreds of observations with paper airplanes and make little changes that we control ourselves, and we don't have to go to an ethics review board to decide how we're going to change this airplane. And of course, we're not dealing with millions of years, so in evolution definitely suffers that. Any sort of discussion about things that have happened over long time scales, like geology or cosmology, like it's very different that way. So in terms of the testable mechanisms, now the thing is, you can't then. It never helps any scientific theory or any scientific investigation to say, well, we don't know this and we can't know this. Well, therefore we're right? As soon as somebody says we don't know this or we will not ever be able to determine this, that doesn't help any theoretical account. That ends up being an information void. And I think that's one of the situations when it comes to discussions of origins, is that no, we of course can't know all these things. But let me just really specifically on your point about the mechanisms being testable. They are testable in one way, although I'll kind of have to step on a point that I heard Gio make earlier when he was drawing a distinction between natural selection and artificial selection. I really wish that the term natural selection hadn't caught on. I mean, it was right in the title of the subtitle, I guess, of Darwin's very famous book, and it sort of described selection that was being done by nature. But there's nothing about natural selection that is necessary for evolution. What is necessary is differential breeding success, so that you have a population of critters, and some of those critters are successful in reproducing and having viable, reproducing offspring, and that there's some criterion for determining which ones are going to be successful, and that's all that matters, is that some are successful and some are not. And if it turns out, well, the one with the longer beaks tend to be the ones that are successful, well, then that's differential breeding success. That's selection. There's nothing. It's not required that it's natural selection. It could be, cattle owner selection, or laboratory scientist selection, or it could be deity selection. There could be a god that's picking which animals survive and which ones don't. That's not the point. The mechanism is differential breeding success. The mechanism isn't properly natural selection, and then therefore other methods of selection that aren't, from granola Mother Nature somehow don't count as evolution. So we can let's speed up my answer here, is that we can test those things by looking at things that have faster generations and doing selection, observing selection over things like the myelinase bacteria and whatnot, or doing those experiments in a laboratory. But I'll have to concede this then, that only works when you want to make speculation about how bacteria evolve, or Drosophila fruit flies.
And Hogtie,
the problem is,
I have something I want to throw out here.
But it doesn't help us understand how hippopotamus or elephants or human beings evolve, because those
Right, just really quick, guys. Let me respond really quick. I mean, I think this is like the point that we got off of earlier. That's testability. We can't really test to see if any of those small changes are going to lead to the big change. So, I mean, I think that's what the main point is. We can see, I mean, everybody here would agree that we're going to see variations happen. I mean, even what he brought up with the myelinase, the ability to digest myelinase. I mean, yeah, but it had to lose what? Three different functions, I believe, so we can get a function that might be conceived as something new. Does that therefore follow evolution as in common descent? I mean, that would actually fit a young Earth creationist model, because what they're expecting is that things are degrading, things are falling apart over time, so it's losing three functions really. So I mean, the main point is this. The main point being is that any amount of small incremental changes, any ability to get larger beaks or smaller beaks that we would expect in different environments or whatever, that doesn't therefore mean that those small changes are going to lead to one of these big or greater changes that we're seeing in the different phylum. So, I mean, I think that's the point. That can't be tested. All we're really doing is we're looking at the fossil record, and we're, interpreting that based on this presupposition of evolution.
No, actually, that's not.
Hold on. No.
I cut off Eddie, so let Eddie speak.
MMA needs to talk.
No. I've been doing quite a few jumps.
Okay, MMA. Go ahead.
Yeah.
MMA.
So, just so everyone knows, I wasn't presented to everyone, but just for the general public who watches this in the future and currently, I provided both in the side chat and was screen sharing quite a number of papers dealing with the phylogenetic tree and two recent renditions of it, one being only published a few weeks ago, and they have to go through a genomic analysis. I then shared another paper earlier on explaining how we use genomic analysis to show common ancestry and so forth. And so it's quite clear that the common ancestry, speciation, and all this has been established within science. It's obviously a blunt point to put it, but it isn't up for argumentation within the scientific community.
I disagree 100% with that. 100% I disagree with that, because a lot of these species where they say that that a speciation event has happened, they're only saying that because thus far they haven't been seeing interbreeding, but that does not necessarily mean that they will not be found interbreeding in the future, and in some cases they end up being found interbreeding. So just because you find a species that will not interbreed because they're maybe separated or they just haven't been seeing interbreeding yet, that doesn't necessarily mean that a speciation event has actually occurred.
Well,
So
it's
I
not
mean,
about
that's not true
seeing
at all.
them.
That's 100%
It's
not
not
true.
seeing them, have sex. It's about their genetics. They're incompatible. It's a genetic barrier that they are just isolated genetically. They cannot interbreed when you have speciation to an extent. You're not going to have that. And it's not about you don't see them, mating. It's
Okay,
just
so you
that
said you
it's
screen
genetically
shared,
not going to
right?
happen.
You said you screen shared. You put the links on the side, right? So which link is this?
The ones I provided on the side chat were on the two phylogenetic trees. One was from last year. The other one was
Yeah,
published a
they
few
don't say
weeks
the name.
ago.
So which one is it? Can you just put it again here on the side chat? I have a question to ask before we start reading it too. Before we start reading it, I have a question to ask. These articles, are they about living organisms that we've tested and that we've observed their changes happen?
Yeah, this is doing genetic analysis. Yes. So this one I was again I'll post it once more. This is one I posted a few weeks ago. Titled "A New View of the Tree of Life," published in Nature Microbiology. And then the other one I provided was from the National Academy of Sciences, Synthesis of Phylogeny and Taxonomy into a Comprehensive Tree of Life. And I'll provide that one.
Okay, so this is the one. I'm going to screen share it, right? I'm going to screen share it. So this first link that you gave me, this has to do with the phylogeny situation, right? Or the
phylogeny tree, yes.
Yeah. So so they can't interbreed anymore. This is something that we've observed from species currently, right?
Well, this isn't going into speciation. It highlights speciation, but it's not giving me examples of it. It's just talking about the tree of life, doing this genomic analysis on a whole bunch of different.
Okay, so which one are you talking about? Is showing about speciation events happening now to where they cannot no longer.
Okay, well, it's not speciation. In that hangout me and you had before, you were reading them back out to me, and you didn't like those. But I will provide them again.
No. You've never given me any links over this before.
No. You were in that hangout, remember? And you read them back out to me, and then you kicked me eventually. That hangout?
No, that didn't have anything to do with this. The only articles that you've ever given me had to do with cancer. You were giving me the
and then I provided the other ones.
And the first one that you gave me
come on.
Come on, don't start this. If you got the link.
I did from Biomed Central. I'll pull them up again. BMC. Those ones had to do with ring speciation.
I'm asking for the link. link.
Okay,
a lot
you
of
read
times
these back out to me.
Stuff like this, the article doesn't say anything that you're saying, so I would like the link, please.
Well, no, you read them back out to me. And
so is this? No, I didn't read this out. I don't think so. Let's check it out. So you're saying that this link that you just gave me just now has to do with a speciation event. That's been proven. That has to do with organisms that we've observed now.
Those two papers that I provided that you were reading back out to me.
Okay, so let's read this. Let's check it out. I'll screen share it so that everybody can see it. Okay, can you guys see it?
Can't see it. No, I can't see it. Oh, now we can.
All right. Okay, so it says predictors for let me see. Turn my screen. Reproductive isolation in ring species complex following genetic and ecological divergence. Reproductive isolation, RI, is widely accepted as the important checkpoint to the diversification process, since it defines irreversible evolutionary trajectories. Much less consensus exists about the process that might drive RI. Here we employ a formal quantitative analysis of the genetic interactions at several stages of divergence within the ring species complex. To assess the relative contribution of genetic and ecological divergence for the development of RI. Results by the argumenting previous genetic data
sets. Could I interrupt for a second?
I mean, this is a really long article. I mean, it's really going to be
Well, he can just read the
a
conclusions.
conversation to read
Well,
this
no,
entire article.
he could just read the results and the conclusions. It goes into more depth, of course, but just read those results and conclusions.
Okay, so the results and conclusions. Okay, that's where I'm at right here. By argumenting previous genetic data sets and adding new ecological data, we quantify levels of genetic and ecological divergence between populations and test how they correlate with restrictions of genetic admixture upon secondary contact. Our results indicate that the isolated effect of the ecological divergence between parental populations does not result and associated with overall genetic divergence are the it doesn't sound like it's saying anything that you're saying, man.
You just missed a sentence.
I'm reading the whole thing. We'll go through it again.
No, you just missed a sentence.
Stop interrupting. Stop interrupting, please. I got it in front of me. I can read it again if you want me to. Just ask me to read it again. It says that test how they correlate with restrictions of genetic admixture upon secondary contact. Our results indicates that the isolated effect of ecological divergence between parental populations does not result in reproductive. I'm sorry, guys. I got my.
Reproductively isolated taxa. Even with genetic transitions between parental.
Hold on. Isolated taxa, even the genetic transitions between parental taxa are narrow instead of the process associated with the overall genetic divergence are the best predictors of reproductive isolation. And when parental taxa diverge in nuclear markers, we observe the complete cessation of hybridization, even to sympatric occurrence of distinct evolutionary lineages. Although every parental population has diverged into mitochondrial DNA, its degree of divergence does not predict the external of RI. So what is your point?
It should be quite obvious.
Okay, so
the concluding section is like the results show that Argentina, the evolutionary outcomes of ecological divergence differ from those of genetic divergence. While evident properties of taxa may emerge via ecological divergence, such as adaptation to local environment, RI is likely to be a byproduct of processes that can contribute to the overall genetic divergence, such as time and geographic isolation, rather than being a direct outcome of local adaptation.
Okay, well, the point is that this is not saying that the genetic divergence is keeping them from, that's not saying anything about them not being able to interbreed anymore. Of course, there's going to be genetic divergence. That's going to happen. I mean, when species vary anyways to begin with. But how is this saying that the genetic divergence indicates that they cannot no longer interbreed? Because we would expect that anyways, right? We would expect genetic divergence we see genetic divergence with wolves and dogs and coyotes.
You'd go to the section on.
You said that this section.
Ecological divergence as a factor of reproductive isolation.
So this actually happened with humans. I don't see what the big deal is here.
I tell you what the big deal is. He said that he was telling me that genes. That they were separated by genes so that they can no longer interbreed. This doesn't say that. It's just talking about genetic divergence. That's all it's saying. We already know that, and you're going to see genetic divergence, even with, like I just mentioned, dogs and wolves, but they're not separated from being able to breed by that genetic divergence. So nothing that he's saying is connecting with what he was saying. I mean, there's not anything here saying that the genetic divergence is keeping them from interbreeding with each other. I think that would be obviously a silly thing to say, because we know that there are some species like what we were talking about earlier, lions and tigers, they can be interbred.
Well, even a little less contentious one is like elephants, right? They talk to any elephantologist. What would the term be? There are 3 species of elephants because they tend to group and gather. They don't interbreed. Now, can you take an African, what are they called, the African bush elephant, the African forest elephant? Can you interbreed them? Probably. I guess so. I don't know. Who cares? Because that's not really where the species boundary is in whether or not it's possible to breed them. But biologists classify species by, well, there's that group of animals over there and that group of animals. I don't mean, when I say over there, I don't mean geographically. I mean when you talk about a population, you mean an interacting population, and in the case of biology, you mean reproducing. And the fact of the matter is that those two types of African elephants don't interbreed, so any biologist would classify them as separate species.
I've got another
Even though technically
prediction that I want to throw out to you guys.
Yeah, well, we touched on this earlier. I mean, I wouldn't say that, like, for example, like I brought up earlier with tigers and lions, that's some sort of speciation event. So I think that's like the main point right here. All I was doing by bringing in the tigers and the lions was that if we're observing the changes happening now, and we can see that, two species like that, or two, the lion and the tiger, that they can interbreed with each other, I think that obviously that would indicate that that's not necessarily true. I mean, like the finches, that they're not seeing breeding with each other anymore in the Galapagos Island. I believe it's Daphne major. They haven't been seen interbreeding with each other as well. There's a large divergence there, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they can't be interbred, because we know that we can take cheetahs and take their mix them with lions, and you can get a hybrid with that. So I mean, you can do the same thing. Just because they're not seen interbreeding with each other, that doesn't necessarily mean that they won't interbreed. I mean, and again, the article that he was giving me didn't say anything about the genetic divergence keeping them from being able to interbreed. It just talked about the genetic divergence, and it just didn't connect with what he was saying.
Can I take a step back? I want to go back to something that was said about the testability of evolution, and how there are methods that it could actually be overturned. I want to go back to the honesty of evolution, and I feel like that there was this idea that the perfect example is, and I mentioned it earlier, and I got some flack for it because I didn't really get a chance to explain it, but the perfect example is chromosome number 2. This was a testable hypothesis for evolution. And it actually presented the problem for evolution originally, because if apes and humans truly had a common ancestor, then we should have the same number of chromosomes, but we don't. And that was actually an issue for early evolutionists. Humans having only 23 pairs and apes having 24. And so this was a method to test the honesty and integrity of the theory of evolution, and evolution came out on top.
So I have a question.
Well, sorry, can I just do chromosome number 2 thing, because he mentioned that before, and I think before, that's right, Stephen.
Go ahead, Hogtie.
When you mentioned that, Eddie, before, when you mentioned chromosome number 2 being a prediction, I thought what you meant was that evolution would predict those kind of fusions. And I was very quick, even interrupted you to disagree with that. I don't think evolution made the prediction specifically that, well, this fusion would happen, because keep in mind, by the time evolution theory came along, there had already been, the other apes with their 48 chromosomes, and humans with the 46. So you wouldn't say, because what I'm saying is that the observation of the numbers of chromosomes was made before evolution was really discussed as a theory. So you wouldn't say, well, so maybe I misunderstood you. I thought you were saying that evolution would predict the fusion. But given the
evolutionary biologists did predict that at some point a chromosome fusion happened. That was a prediction by evolutionary biologists.
Well, that's not a prediction.
I don't know how many sources to cite, but that was a prediction specifically made.
No, that's my point. That's not a prediction then, because the thing is, they already knew. Well, I'm sorry. What am I saying? What the hell? I cannot believe I just said that.
There was no confirmation of a fusion on the chromosomes. At this point, there had been we didn't have the means to test that.
That's right. Thank you. That was a terrible. That was a ridiculous thing. I said it was so bad. I said, evolution's been around. We already knew that they had this many chromosomes before evolution came around. That's ridiculous. We didn't know about chromosomes back then. I'm so sorry. But that was ridiculous.
Prior to being able to test, and see, this goes back to, they asked for a specific demonstration of a predictive measure that couldn't be tested. They gave specific parameters. They said, well, it has to be something, they give an example of Mars. If they did something on Mars and we had no way to test it and found out it was true, that's a way to prove it. Well, this is what chromosome number 2 did.
What I'm saying is that evolution
specifically predicted.
Evolution wouldn't necessarily predict that specific fusion from happening. I'm saying that once they made the observation, like you think, well, wait a minute. So one of the features of apes is that they all have 48 chromosomes. Oh, it turns out here's one type of purported ape that has 46. Well, that's really puzzling. Well, if evolution's true, that is, sorry, we keep saying evolution, we mean common ancestry. And in this case, we mean specifically common ancestry amongst the great apes, including humans, under the theory. That is a big kick in the teeth for evolutionary theory. So, but if it's true, then what we'd expect to find, now let's make a prediction about an observation we hadn't made yet, and that is about the telomeric sequences.
Yeah,
and that's a very risky prediction. Very risky prediction to say, well, if it's the case that chromosome number 2, given the size and shape of it, is actually a fusion of, and I forget which it is, 2 other chromosomes, well then what we would expect to see is too many telomeric sequences, and specifically in the locations that would make up for for this chromosome matching up with that chromosome. So if that's what you mean, that like they made the prediction that we would observe these multiple telomeric sequences, that's a very risky prediction. And then, yeah, I would agree that is one that was made and confirmed.
Yes, although because the difference between humans having 23 pairs and apes having 24 pairs was a serious problem because at any point, if a chromosome was spontaneously lost or gained between the offspring, it would result in serious consequences. It would end in either miscarriage or phenotypic disorder like Down syndrome or Turner syndrome. And this was a major problem. And evolutionary, and as you properly stated, this was a very risky proposition to propose that this was the case. And lo and behold, it is the case. To me, this is nail in the coffin on anybody who refuses to accept.
Yeah, the problem is here's the problem with it. The chromosomes on the chromosome 2. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead, man.
Okay, so this is it goes back to what I was talking about earlier. Let's just say one of the predictions that you just made, that you just brought up, right? Let's just say I use a completely different method to make that prediction, or to make a prediction that's close to that, right? And I label myself as an ID proponent. Would that put it under the ID category? Listen, science is science. Evolution, it's a theory, it's a scientific theory, but it's not science itself. Like, that's the whole point of it. The scientific method it's a tool that we use to make predictions and study natural phenomena, right? And that's all it is, right?
Well,
theory.
Science is the tool. But
the problem is, I want to respond real quick, guys, because I've been trying to stay quiet for a while. Can I respond really quick? It wasn't a fusion event. I mean, it wasn't a fusion event. It's declared as it being a fusion event, but when you look at the chromosomes, what you're actually seeing is an absence of telomeric repeats, and you would expect to see that very clear distinction if the two chromosomes had fused together, but you don't see that. Well, let me put it this way: they're absent to the point where you can't tell if they actually fused.
Right? I did mention a moment ago too. I said that I think there is rock solid evidence that that's a fusion because of there's just too many telomeric sequences for it to be one chromosome. Although I did mention sort of under my breath, and it's hard to tell what gets heard when multiple people talk, but I did say, but that point is under dispute. Now, to clarify, there's precisely one author I know of who's I believe he's an ID proponent, and Drew, you know who I'm thinking of? Do you remember the name? I think you'd even reshared some of his stuff a while ago.
B?
I don't think it was
Michael
B.
Agax.
Is it London?
I don't remember. Well, let me just limit it to what I do know. Then is this is the idea that chromosome 2 is a fusion has not gone unchallenged by the ID or creationist community, and there is actually a paper out now that shows that there's protein coding sequences that span. We would call it transtelomeric. So this internal telomere, which doesn't make sense to have a telomere inside a chromosome. But there's the claim now is that there's a protein coding sequence that actually starts before the telomere, goes right through it, and finishes on the other side of the telomere. That makes no sense at all if it's a fusion. I mean, somebody would have to come up with a different theoretical account for that. But it turns out that dispute is itself under dispute. There are people who know far more than I do about how sequencing works. That say that no, basically the way that this comes out is somebody sat down with because we have the whole human genome available online, right? And this guy sat down and looked at it and said, well, hey, when I look at this, I see this protein coding sequence that goes across here, and other people that know more about it I don't know how he came to that conclusion, and other people who say know more about it than I do said, no, here's why the method he used was wrong. And to be honest with you, I don't know how he came up with it. I don't know what their refutation is. So I'm just suggesting to people in the room, keep your ears open. If you are sure that it's a fusion, be aware that it's something that's disputed by this particular author. And if you're a big fan of this author, keep in mind that there are people out there who've written fairly credible rebuttals to it. But unfortunately, I don't know enough about either. Yeah.
There's been geneticists as well that have actually critiqued it, because you would expect if you had two chromosomes fusing, you would be able to see the patterns within the telomeric sequences all the way across the board. So you would be able it would be very distinctive. You'd be able to see that if it were two chromosomes that fuse, and you don't see that. I mean, just saying that because you got it's too large of sequences, that therefore it's too big. It cannot be just one. I don't think that's really a good answer, because I think that if a chromosome has a specific pattern to it, and you can tell. I mean, that's actually what's going to make it distinctive.
Well, how would you tell? You are talking about the telomeric sequence, right? When you say you could tell, how would you tell?
Well, what happens is that when you're looking at the chromosome, you can see the patterns. There's certain patterns that follow that chromosome. So I'm saying that if you have a chromosome attaching to it, and it's just a steady pattern all the way across the board, then you can't. There's no way for you to distinguish if it's actually two different chromosomes fusing to each other.
I don't know what you mean by a pattern. It doesn't go like AT all the way. Like what do you mean by a pattern?
Well, I'm talking about the telomeric patterns. I mean, you know what I mean by the telomeric patterns, right?
Well, I mean by pattern. I was calling it telomeric sequences. Like there's a sequence that's sort of famously a telomere. It's not a coding. It's saying, well, here's the end of the thing. Yeah, and in the case of chromosome 2, there's one at one end and one in the middle, two in the middle, and then one at the other end.
Caps, you're talking about the caps and the end of the DNA, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm talking about. There's a specific patterns that you can see down the line on a chromosome. So if there were two chromosomes that fuse with each other, you would see that pattern to where it would be messed up. You would see a different pattern.
Different in what way? Again, do you accept what you do see is you see telomere and then coding sections, and then you see a centromere, and then more coding sections, and then you see telomere, and then more coding, and then another centromere that's inactive, and then more coding, and then another telomere.
Right. Yeah.
Is that not the pattern that's on chromosome 2?
Yeah, but obviously, if there were two chromosomes that fuse with each other, you'd be able to see the distinction in the pattern, right?
But that's what I'm saying. That's what they do see. That's what I don't understand.
Yeah, that is what they see. That's the whole point.
You see a steady flow of the cap, so you don't see that at all.
I don't see a steady flow of the cap. What does that mean?
There's nothing at all indicating that it's two distinct.
No. There are four telomeres which begin and end in the chromosome, and two centromeres which are found at the center of the chromosome. I mean,
I think you're. I don't think you're on what we're talking about.
Well, I'm sure I'm not. I just need you to explain what you mean by. Just explain it. So again, I just want to be clear. My understanding is that what they see is there is a telomere at each end like you'd normally expect, but in the middle there's a pair of telomeres, just one right after another, and then in between the one end and the pair of telomeres there's a centromeric sequence, and the same on the other side, right? Where normally in a chromosome you would see a telomere on each end and a centromere in the middle. This one has, telomere, centromere, telomere, telomere, centromere, telomere. It just looks like two chromosomes jammed together.
No, I think exactly what you would hope for if we shared common ancestry with
with the apes.
No. What you would expect to see is you would expect to see a I don't know how to put it. You would expect to see something to alter or to disrupt the repeats that you would be seeing with the telomeric, the telomeric. What you're seeing with these, these different capies, that's what you would see. You'd see something that would be distinctive there. You wouldn't see a steady flow all the way across the board.
I don't know what that means, a steady flow all the way across the board, because you don't. You see these very distinct sequences.
You see steady, distinct sequences within one chromosome. That's the point.
But the sequences you see include a telomere and then two more telomeres right side by side in the middle of it, and then another telomere on the end. Why else would that happen? Other than
because
fusion?
You're talking about you're talking about a fusion of chromosomes, and if you're seeing one chromosome, then you're not. I don't know what you're missing right here.
I don't either.
If I'm looking at one chromosome, right, and it's having a consistent pattern of these specific cappings, right? Where are we going to be able to distinguish that there's a fusion event if you can't see that? If all you're seeing is one clean chromosome.
Well, if I look at
there's a lot there, but just because there's a lot there doesn't mean that there's two distinct chromosomes, and that's the point here. There's nothing.
No, you're missing the point.
Yeah, I think if I'm looking at
I'm not missing the point. I think I'm being pretty clear right here. I'm trying to understand where it is that you guys are thinking that there is a fusion event.
Okay, because if I'm looking at 23 chromosomes, so forget it's 23 pairs, but let's just pick out one of each pair, because they're obviously comparable. The number one and the number one. So we pick out one of the 23 pairs, and 22 of them have this pattern where there are these long coding sections interspersed by other things. Let's not get into the epigenetics of it, but consistently you always see exactly two telomeric sequences, always one at one end and always one at the other end. And somewhere in between, there's a centromeric sequence, always one. But then I've got this one chromosome that's kind of on the big side, and it's got a telomere on the end and a telomere on the other end. But then in the middle, it's got two telomeres. In the middle of it, it's the only one that has in the middle of it. And then in between the pair of telomeres and the actual functional telomere, there's a centromere. And on the other side, between the pair of telomeres and the end cap on that end, there's a not functional centromere. I would say, well, how can that happen? And of course, if I have another blood sample from, an orangutan, and it's got 48 pairs of chromosomes, and it happens to be that number 2 is the same length as number whatever plus number whatever, I forget the numbers, I should look it up, light bulb might go on and say, well, here's a candidate explanation for it. So perfectly. Yeah.
No, because that's not exactly what you would see, right? You would expect it because you're looking at So if you're looking at the telomeres, what you would basically expect to see would be you would look at the stability of the loops, right, and the motifs. That's what you would try to look at. If I think you were to find something that was inside of the chromosome, you would try to look for something that would be outside of the patterns of that specific looping. Do you get what I'm trying to say? So if you're seeing
not even slightly. Let me ask you this: how do you think? So the proposed fusion, which I'll call it proposed fusion because I understand it's under dispute, not everyone accepts it, but under their view, how do you think the fusion took place? I mean, is it a side by side snuggling up or an end to end?
What I'm trying to say is that with the chromosome, you're seeing specific patterns inside of that chromosome, right? You're going to be seeing specific patterns in this chromosome. If you're seeing a steady pattern in one chromosome and the chromosomes fused at the end, then you would be seeing a different pattern, right? You would see where it would be disrupted. But we're not seeing that.
Yeah, okay, yes, you do. But the thing is, you see that in every chromosome, where if you were to lay out a chromosome on the table in front of you, which whatever that would mean, you see Like there's no. That's why I was confused by the word pattern, because it's not a repeating. Maybe that's not what you meant, but there's no pattern to a chromosome in that it's not like AT, AT, AT over and over again. Right? There's different bands, there's different long stretches of it that'll code for this protein or that protein. And if you look at one end of a chromosome, you're going to find a telomeric sequence, and then something that encodes for whatever that end of the chromosome encodes for. And right after that, there's going to be another sequence that encodes for something else, and another sequence that encodes for something else. And then there's going to be a centromere, and then more, I don't know, whatever this is for. But the other end of the chromosome is going to code for something else. With chromosome 2, that's what you see. You don't see a consistent pattern across all of it, but you don't see a pattern across any chromosome. In its growth structure, the thing that's consistent pattern is always a telomere, one at each end, and a centromere, not in the exact middle, but somewhere between. And chromosome 2 is the one exception because it's got a telomere, and then some stuff, and then a centromere and some stuff, and then a pair of telomeres, and then some stuff in another centromere, and then some stuff in a telomere. And that's exactly what you would expect if it was an end-to-end fusion of two different chromosomes.
Yeah, but the problem is that we're not seeing anything like that with the chromosome, with the fusion of these two chromosomes, like what's being claimed.
That's exactly what we're seeing.
No, you're seeing an absence of those tandem repeats.
What do you mean tandem repeats? You're talking about the two telomeres side by side?
Yeah, I'm talking about the capping. You would be able to see right there at that end where they were fusing together. You would see a distinction where they had fused with each other, but we don't see that.
You do. That's what I'm saying. You see two chunks in the middle of chromosome 2, two chunks of non-coding telomeric sequences. They're just looking at the telomere.
Okay, but you do also see non-coding regions elsewhere, right?
Yeah, like.
So
hey, go ahead and,
if you're seeing I'm sorry.
Yeah, true. Go ahead and click on that link I posted in the chat, the last link.
Okay, let's see this. Okay, you're showing me the fusion and at the fusion towards the end.
Show what we're talking about. I mean, I don't see how you. I mean, to me, it's like it just comes across as you. No matter what.
You see things like this throughout the chromosome, though. That's the point. This isn't like as straightforward as what you're trying to show me right now. What I'm trying to say is that the fusion event would not be. It wouldn't look like this. You wouldn't expect to see a consistent pattern of these cappings, right? So I mean, why are you showing me this with this right here?
Oh, I'm trying to post that into the live chat, but I remember I can't post links in your. Can I post anything? Oh, this is your other channel. I can post. Okay, never mind. I don't know what to tell you about this, True, because this is a reliable observation. I mean, and Eddie just posted like sketches that are based on photographs, and the photograph is right beside it. And I swear, I'm not understanding what your criticism is. Like you're saying that we're not seeing that, referring to the fusion location.
Well,
but we're saying yes, we are.
So yeah, because they exist because they're existing as independent monomers. That's what we're seeing.
They exist. What do you mean they exist as independent monomers?
Well, I'm saying that. Okay, so you're looking at the telomeric repeats that are only existing as monomers. But you're not seeing the tandem repeats that that would show a flow of two distinct chromosomes fusing with each other, right?
I think I don't know what you mean by tandem repeats or distinct monomers. Like you
I don't really know how. Yeah, I don't really know how much clearer I can make it. I mean, if you're looking at a flow of two different chromosomes that are fusing, you would see. You would see the distinction of two chromosomes fusing, but the pattern of those chromosomes seem to be consistent all the way across the board, as if it's one chromosome.
I mean, I don't see what you don't see. That is what you are seeing. You're seeing a pattern of two chromosomes.
No, that type of pattern you're seeing in different places, though. So how do we know that that's the place where they were fused? I mean, the point is that what you're looking at, it seems like it's one chromosome. That's what it looks like.
Like in the photograph? Is that what you mean? Because you have to do sequencing to know what a telomere. Like, I mean, I don't know. Okay, look at the ends of the chromosome in the picture. On the let's call it the south end, the bottom end of the human chromosome 2, it's kind of grayish, and then it's kind of darker gray a little above that, and then there's some more bands. Go to the other end, it's kind of a dark gray. Like, you can't tell what a telomeric sequence is by looking at a photograph of it.
Yeah, but if it's in the independent monomers the way that it is, I mean, fusion events, they can take place like this, but usually whenever, like we're looking at with this chromosome, there's actually an effect that actually takes place within when chromosomes fuse like this to where they actually self-destruct. So, I mean, it wouldn't happen like this. The way that the independent monomers are set up in here, it looks like it's a steady one chromosome.
Well, in the photograph, yeah, but if you sequence it, there are like hallmark telomeric sequences. Every telomere of every chromosome in the human body has a recognizable telomeric sequence. I mean, I think you got to do some reading on.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
When I use the term
that's what I'm saying. We don't see a distinction of two chromosomes fusing right there. I mean, this event. What is the word for it? What is the word for it? What is the word? You're showing me the picture, but I don't think you're getting the picture, Addy, because the picture that you're showing me is showing what I'm questioning right here. I mean, that we can't say that the fusion event happened at that point.
Well, what he's not showing you, he's showing you a picture of an actual photograph of the human chromosome, and I guess chimp, they called it 2A and 2B.
Now, what is it called? What is it called? I'm looking for the word. I don't know what the word is called. It's when this type of event happens with the monomers. I don't remember what it's called, but it actually causes it to actually self-destruct.
Can I ask a quick question?
Do you know what the word is that I'm looking for, Hogtie?
No. Like, are you talking about like when there's translocations?
I'm trying to ask a question.
No. I don't remember what the word was. It's been such a long time since I've looked into this. It's like apoptosis or something like that.
Apoptosis.
Is that what I'm looking for?
Apoptosis is self-destruction, yes.
Apoptosis. I think that's exactly what would happen in this event.
Why do you think that?
What are we talking about?
Well, because usually when this type of event happens with the chromosomes, this is what would actually happen. It would self-destruct.
I got to pick you up on what you mean by usually. Like what experience do you rely on to know what usually happens when chromosomes fuse in species?
Perfect.
Well, what I'm saying is that, I mean, whenever this type of event happens, it's actually hazardous to the cell, so it self-destructs. There's a similar process that actually happens the same way with what is it called? It's the P57 gene, I believe it is. When there's a damaged cell inside of something damaged inside of the cell, it'll self-destruct to keep that cell from replicating.
Can I ask a question?
So there's a mechanism. There's a mechanism that's put in place that keeps the damaged cell from reproducing. That's what apoptosis basically does.
Okay.
So if we're looking at with the sequences that we're looking here, and we're looking at the monomers, and we're looking at the capping, and you're saying that it fused the way that it did, that's going to be hazardous to this because usually in other, like there was a case of somebody that actually his chromosomes actually fused together, I believe, but I don't remember how exactly it fused, but it didn't fuse together like this, and I like that. That's okay, but right here, it's the way that the motifs are actually being shown. This is actually like one straight chromosome.
The way
that can I ask a question?
Just hang on a sec, Backminder. Just because the thing is, right now you're making a bunch of, and I'm going to say just wild, unfounded assertions. You're saying that usually this would happen. This is what I would expect to happen. And
you know what apoptosis is, right? That's what apoptosis is.
Sure, but what you're doing
that's what happens when there's something going wrong with it. I mean, it's self-destruct.
You're making a declaration that anytime there's an end-to-end chromosome fusion, it's going to lead to cell death. And you don't know that to be the case. What you're
this is.
Let me. I'll distill.
No. This right here isn't an end-to-end chromosome fusion. That's what I'm trying to say about this.
I know that's what you're trying to say. That's what you're asserting, and you have no basis to assert it. What you're saying is because
I'm saying that it's not an end-to-end fusion because the capping isn't showing like you're saying it. I'm making a very clear statement right here.
I know you're making a clear statement. You're saying that that's not an end-to-end fusion, but I'm saying that theoretically, people who study this will say that yes, that's an end-to-end fusion. This is
okay. Well, that's not true because there are geneticists that say something different. I mean, so that's not true.
And there are also
it would be true that it wouldn't be true. Hold on, it would be actually true that there are scientists that say that, but there are also I should have rephrased that differently because there's geneticists that say otherwise.
Yeah, the thing is, you can point to things and say, well, this would be a really, really weird chromosomal event, and you know what? I know of some other really, really weird chromosomal events, and that leads to cell death. Or to genetic anomalies. Well, therefore, a chromosome 2 fusion would have led to cell death or to genetic anomalies. And that's not the case. I mean, yeah, you may be able to point to any other number of chromosomal anomalies.
No, you're misunderstanding what I'm saying. I'm talking about the tandem repeats that you're finding inside of these genes. They look like a steady flow of a chromosome. That's what they look like. They look like a steady flow of one chromosome. You're trying to say that these are two chromosomes, but that the pattern doesn't follow that. It doesn't follow that there are two distinct chromosomes. It just shows that one steady flow of one chromosome.
Okay, sorry. Let's go back to your tandem repeats. What are you looking for when you're talking about? You're saying there should be tandem repeats or there shouldn't be?
No, I'm talking about that you would see a distinction in tandem repeats. If you're seeing a steady flow of a pattern inside of a chromosome with, just like, separate or like, random places to where you can see the capping, well, then you can't sit over here and say that, well, here's the capping event. Because I don't think it follows.
You're not answering my question about the tandem repeats. You keep mentioning tandem repeats, and I said, in response to that, I don't know what you mean by that. Like I know what tandem repeats are, but
it's actually very simple. I'm trying to figure out where it is that you're saying that the chromosome events happen. You're giving me an example right there, but that is found in different places as well. You're not seeing that. You can't tell me where the fusion event specifically happened.
Yeah. Okay. Exactly. I can tell you exactly where it is. Where there's.
But you can't. That's the problem.
Yes, I can.
You can't tell me where it happened if there's a steady flow.
I would be able to.
Can I say something?
I can't. Just 1 second. I can because you've got a telomeric sequence on the end, and then you've got some stuff, including a centromere and some more stuff, and then you've got a telomere and another telomere. It's in between those two internal telomeres is where the fusion happened.
Okay, and here's the problem. You see other tandem repeats throughout the chromosome. I don't know how you're not getting this, man.
Okay, well, because I keep asking you, what do the tandem repeats have to do with it? There may be other places in the chromosome.
Maybe the
point. They're not tandem repeats of telomeric sequences. They're tandem repeats of other things like encoding or controlling sequences, but they're not telomeric sequences.
Yeah, I don't know how you're not getting this, man. I mean, if you're seeing a steady flow of specific patterns in a chromosome, you can't point out one pattern in that chromosome if it's found other places as well, because then that's not necessarily.
Okay.
You can't say that it's a chromosome event. Then I mean, I don't know how you're not understanding it.
Well, it's because
it looks like one steady chromosome with specific tandem repeats, but you're picking out one spot and you're saying.
Okay, where are you getting this thing when you say specific pattern of tandem repeats? Where are you getting that and how is it relevant?
Let FactFinder ask a question because I don't get what you're not understanding.
All right. I don't know much. I'm learning a lot. I hope I'm learning a lot. But I think maybe could you guys point to a specific fusion event that is known, probably a fusion event that scientists can reproduce now so that we can compare what a fusion event looks like to what is being purported here?
I don't know of any that scientists have repeated. Like you generally wouldn't do a study where you're like, well, we're going to start gluing chromosomes together. Also, keep in mind I don't do like molecular biology or genetics. So it's not really my area. But is it going to be a race between me and MM for? Can you remember the examples of the guy in China or whatever that? Or am I mixing that up with the Robertsonian? There's somebody who has a different number of chromosomes.
Yeah, he was in China.
Oh, Daryl's here. Yeah.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about. He's who's in China, I believe. But yeah, actually, I mean, I might be saying something wrong, Hogtie. That's probably why I'm not explaining myself good, because it's been a while since I've actually talked about this topic. But I'm pretty sure that the points that you're showing me to, that you would have to see, you would have to show a difference in the repeats of these cappings. And what you're pointing to, I think you can look at different places, so you can't point out where the fusion events happen. I'm willing to be corrected on that, but based on what I'm hearing, I mean, I don't know why you're not getting what I'm saying.
Well, I'm not getting what you're saying because you mentioned the tandem repeats, and I don't consider the two telomeric sequences in the middle to be tandem repeats. That's not what a tandem repeat is. And I'm wondering, and I sort of first I didn't know why.
Yeah. Well, I know what you're talking about, but yeah. Hold on, Robbie. I get what you're saying and what you're talking about. You know, you're going to see specific tandem repeats, but I think that you're misunderstanding what I'm saying about, you know, that capping towards the end, because that's what you're saying where they fuse at, right? They're fusing together. That's what that picture is supposed to show.
Mm-hmm.
All right, there's a few points on this that are kind of just, I guess we're going circles on. First, the analogous chromosomes 2p and 2q. In the non-human grades can be shown right there when laid in the end to create identical banding structure as a human chromosome. That's what we're talking about. Furthermore, the next thing I would say probably is the remains of the sequence that the chromosome has on its ends, aka the telomere, is found in the middle of the human chromosome 2, where the ancestral chromosomes fused. You can see that. I mean,
but that's the problem. You don't see that in the middle. What it looks like with the chromosome is one big chromosome.
No. Actually,
there are certain patterns.
Wait a minute. The detail of the region, the pre-telomeric sequence, the telomeric sequence, the reverse telomeric sequence, and the pre-telomeric sequence is exactly what you would expect from a fusion. I don't see
that's not what you would expect. That's actually not what you would expect. Give me a moment. I'm going to screen share a video for you guys, because I don't think I'm doing a good job explaining this. So I'm going to screen share a video for you guys so that you guys can watch it.
That's where you would expect to find if a fusion had occurred in the middle of the human chromosome.
No, that's not what you. That's not at all what you would expect at all. Give me 1 second here.
Maybe I can be some help after the video, probably.
Give me 1 second here, guys, because the patterns that you're seeing.
The centromere. Furthermore, the centromere of the human chromosome 2.
Why do you keep on interrupting? Can you stop? Hey, can you stop talking for a second, please? I'm going to show you guys a video right now.
Sorry, I thought you were pulling the video up. I mean, I was trying to finish my point. So.
Yeah, I know. But
I guess my last thing I would say on that is, at the place where you would expect on the human chromosome, we find the remnants of chimp 2p centromere. That's the point.
No. Take a listen. Well, you might find it right there, but so I wouldn't disagree with that. But what I am disagreeing with is those patterns. Maybe this guy will explain it better than me, though.
How can you disagree with the patterns? You have a pre-telemetric sequence, a telomeric sequence.
Yeah, you got to be quiet for a second.
I mean,
because I'm explaining myself, but I don't think I'm doing a good job explaining it. And give me 1 second. Why isn't it screen sharing? Give me 1 second, guys. I'm sorry. All right, do you guys see what I'm screen sharing?
Yep.
Yes, you can see it.
Are we going to watch the whole 18-minute video?
Yeah, you're going to watch the whole video. This is chromosome fusion. This is a geneticist who's talking about this, okay?
I mean, this is craziness. Hey, be quiet. Videos all of a sudden?
Yeah, we're going to screen share videos.
I mean, come on. This is crazy.
I'm going to hide you from the broadcast, and you're going to shut up. That's what you're going to do.
Look, man, this is his room. Don't act the fool up in his room, man.
No, and that's fine. That's fine. I was actually kind of hoping, True, that because I was actually going to head off to bed here shortly, so I was going to sort of let this one topic go, and then I was going to say my goodnights. But if we're going to do an 18-minute, and I have seen this video. This is actually the one I was talking about. The one. Actually, he was interviewed by Ian Juby also.
Well, I hope you guys stick around for a second, because this guy will explain it much better than I can. I mean, this was like
4 or 5 years ago when I looked into this stuff, so I've forgotten a lot about this, and I know that I'm not doing a good job explaining it. So I want just stick around for a little bit if you can. I think that he's
okay. I can stick around for a few more minutes, and also just to give the endorsement to, if you watch his is it Wazaloo channel, Ian Juby does an interview with him that's a really clear description of this issue.
Is that a creationist or an evolutionist?
Ian Juby, man, it's Ian Juby. Just because he's Canadian, he's a famous creationist. Just because he's a Canadian, don't pretend you don't know him.
All right.
Famous.
All right. I'm gonna play it. All right, guys.
Those wacky Canadians.
Great apes have 24 pairs of chromosomes, but humans only have 23 pairs.
Wait. Stop. Hey, do you know who's talking? True? That's Ian Juby. That voice you just heard? That's Ian Juby.
All right. I'll check him out later.
Is descended from the great apes. It was claimed then that 2 chromosomes fused together into one at some time in the past as humans were evolving. It was believed that human chromosome number 2 was the resultant chromosome composed of 2 fused ape chromosomes. We discussed this claim previously on several shows, as well as Crevo Rant number 181, and how the chromosomal fusion argument is bust. More news has come out since the airing of these shows and our previous interview with Dr. Jeffrey Tompkins, who joins me again. Dr. Tompkins' PhD is in genetics with a master's in plant science and a bachelor's in agriculture education, and he was on faculty in the Department of Genetics and Biochemistry at Clemson University for a decade. He also ran his own Genomics Institute for 5 years. He is now a research scientist with the Institute for Creation Research, where he continues to publish various papers. Some of those papers we're going to discuss today. He joins me from his office in Dallas. Welcome to the show again, Dr. Tompkins.
Thank you. Good to be back.
Now let's start off. I want to backtrack to a paper you came out with in 2011 addressing this claim that humans have a fused chromosome, which allegedly supports evolutionary claims.
Right.
So let's go back in time for a minute, back to 2006, and revisit a lecture given by evolutionist Dr. Kenneth Miller at Case Western University. The lecture is entitled The Collapse of Intelligent Design. Now, it's interesting to note he very confidently claims that not only is there evidence that humans had 2 chromosomes fused, but that this is such powerful proof of evolution that he brought it up in the Kitzmiller-Dover trial, a court case which frankly wasn't a court case, but a 3-ring circus complete with a circus judge. The circuit judge. The segment of Miller's lecture where he discusses the chromosome fusion was linked to all over the internet. In fact, even today, I get comments from atheists and skeptics pointing me to that segment posted on YouTube under the provocative title, How to Shut Up Pesky Creationists. They hand me this video as if I haven't seen it before, as if it's absolute proof of evolution. I'd like to play a segment of that lecture so we can hear straight from the horse's mouth exactly what Miller said.
What must have happened is that 1 pair of chromosomes must have gotten fused. So we should be able to look at our genome and discover that 1 of our chromosomes resulted from the fusion of 2 primate chromosomes. So we should be able to look around our genome. And you know what? If we don't find it, evolution is wrong. We don't share a common ancestor.
Okay, so in 2011, you and Dr. Jerry Bergman came out with a paper showing that this alleged fusion site was small, highly degenerate, and really not much of a fusion signature. 2 years later, you published a second paper showing that the fusion site actually contained the genetic code for an important feature inside a highly expressed life-supporting gene. Now, we discussed this when you were on the show last, and I got a firestorm of emails and comments saying that you were wrong, and even Kevin Miller said you were wrong. So clearly you were wrong.
Okay, well, should we backtrack and
sure
and cover the details of that discovery? Okay. Well, the fusion site actually is a functional feature inside an RNA helicase long non-coding RNA gene. So this gene produces functional long non-coding RNAs of various sizes. Now this gene has 3 exons or 3 coding regions. The other areas of the messenger RNAs are spliced out of the transcripts made from this gene. So you get short variants and you get long variants of this gene. So Ken Miller actually gave an interview to a reporter that works for, what was that magazine? I've got it here, Mother Jones.
Oh, yes.
Magazine. Does that sound familiar?
Yes,
okay.
yes.
So the reporter was a guy named Mooney. So Mooney basically got the interview from Ken Miller. So Ken Miller says that the fusion site is actually 1,300 bases away from the gene.
Right.
So a friend of mine at the Discovery Institute said, Jeff, did you see this article? And I said, no, I didn't. He said, well, this is what Miller is saying. He said, you need to contact him and get this thing settled. He said, Ken Miller never responds to me whenever I send him an email, but maybe he'll respond to you. So I sent Ken Miller an email, and he actually responded within an hour. Very quick. And he was very cordial. He gave a nice line. But the interesting thing was he obviously didn't read my paper, because if he would have read my paper in its entirety, he wouldn't have said the things that he said. So I basically had to explain my entire paper to him over a course of several emails. And then he finally realized that he had made a mistake and that I was right. And so he said in the last email, talking about the long transcript, not the short transcript, the long messenger RNA produced from this gene that has all 3 exons. He says, in this transcript, the fusion site is in the middle of the first exon, as you know. Well, actually, it's not in the middle of the first exon. It's in the middle of the first intron. But anyways,
True.
I was right.
I've seen this exact video before. He doesn't talk about any research or any findings at all. He talks about an email exchange with Ken Miller for like 15 minutes. And in here, he makes the claim that Ken Miller had to admit that he was wrong and that this guy, Tom Tompkins, was right. And Ken Miller, in response, has put up the email correspondence on his blog. You can go read it and find out that that's not the admission that he made. This video doesn't at all talk about the findings. At one point, he makes the claim.
Yeah, and actually it does. You got to listen to him and pay attention to what he just said right before.
Okay, but we missed the part where he goes on about the back and forth. Oh, I sent Ken Miller email, and then Ken Miller wrote back, so I had to write back because I know Ken Miller doesn't read, blah, blah, blah. Can we get to the point where he talks about the research?
Is anyone there?
Yeah, I'm sorry, guys. Somebody came in. Give me a second.
And actually took this piece from this email where Miller acknowledged I was right and published it in an article in The Blaze, which is an online media operation. And so people can actually get this article that Casey Luskin published.
Hey, I'm going to take it off screen share, right, guys? Because I got to take something out of my documents that I don't want you guys to see, right? So I'm just going to play the audio.
With Ken Miller's quote from the email admitting I was right. So basically, everything is exactly as I described it, but not as I'm describing it really, but it's because that's what the data says. You know, one thing that's interesting about the fusion site, when they first discovered it back in 1992, now when I talk about when they first discovered the DNA evidence for it, when they sequenced what's called a DNA clone from human chromosome 2 from that region, when they found these telomere repeats, even though they were degenerate, it was not what they were looking for. They say that in the paper. that when fusions occur in nature.
So you guys heard what he said right now. That was not what they were expecting. So that deals with what you guys were talking about, it being a prediction. So just keep that in mind.
In animals that actually survive these things and sometimes even reproduce afterwards, that these fusion events always involve something called satellite DNA. So you can have, actually the PowerPoint presentation I gave you has got a picture describing it. So you can have a chromosome break and have two regions of satellite DNA fused to each other. You can have a telomere fused to satellite DNA, but you never see telomeres fusing to each other in living animals. Sometimes you will get telomeres that will fuse to each other in cancer cell lines, which is, I think it's safe to say that's not a healthy
No, definitely not.
living tissue. But I have evolutionists always say this. Yeah, well, look at cancer cell lines. Telomeres fuse in there. Well, that's not a healthy living tissue indicative of a healthy organism. Cancer genomes are completely rearranged and completely haywire.
Right, definitely not onwards, upwards
Because
evolution.
No, they're not. They don't represent, functional, normal.
See, that's what I was trying to get at too. Like this type of event, if it were to take place the way that you guys were saying that it would take place, this type of event would have actually been dangerous or hazardous to life. So just continue to keep listening.
Cells.
Apoptosis usually it causes it to self-destruct.
Anyways, we never see these things in living animals. So when they discovered this degenerate telomere region, it was not what they were looking for. They were looking for something that had satellite DNA in it. So if the fusion, if the human chromosome fusion was real, it would be the first documented instance of a telomere-telomere fusion ever occurring in nature.
Right.
But obviously that's not what it is.
Right, because two halves of the gene aren't going to come together from two chromosomes.
Well, telomeres are designed, actually telomeres are highly functional machines at the end of your chromosome.
Right.
They contain a very complex set of proteins that are grouped together called the Shelterin protein complex that sits at the end of your chromosome, and the DNA at the end of your chromosome actually folds back into itself to form a DNA quadruplex, and then the Shelterin complex sits down governing all of that and encasing all of that. And it's not just a static complex. It's actually a functional set of active proteins that also interact with elements of the cell cycle and various pathways inside your cell. So telomeres are actually functional machines, entities at the ends of your chromosomes that are doing all sorts of important things to maintain genome stability and to keep your cells functioning properly.
Right.
So they're not just these bare ends hanging out there waiting to fuse.
Right.
So they're designed not to fuse, basically.
Yeah.
When you think about linear chromosomes compared to the circular chromosomes in bacteria or archaea,
right,
you have a logistical problem at the ends. You have an engineering problem that must be solved, and not really a problem, but
right.
From our perspective of intelligent design. But if you were a human engineer, it would be a serious issue to have to deal with and to solve.
Right, okay. Let alone blind chance.
Right.
So pesky creationists didn't shut up about this. All right. So if we can back up just for a second, because so the viewers can understand what we're talking about here. You said the fusion site produces a non-encoding RNA.
Well, it doesn't produce this gene does not produce a protein. So there's over twice as many genes in the human genome as there are protein coding genes that produce RNAs. And these RNAs do all sorts of things. Some of them stay in the nucleus. Some of them go out into the cytoplasm. A very small percentage are even used as signaling molecules in what are called exosomes outside the cell. But a lot of these long non-coding RNAs function in the nucleus, and they modify DNA. They're called chromatin modifying RNAs. And then a lot of them also combine with proteins to form these big complexes with proteins. The RNAs sort of act as backbones for these proteins to bind onto, and they also contain regions that bind to DNA as well in the genome. In fact, there was a paper a few years back where this particular secular research paper said that the genome is like an RNA machine. So really, it's an RNA world in the nucleus of a cell in the genome. And so this gene produces long, non-coding RNAs of various different types. It's alternatively spliced. It has dual promoters. It has a promoter in front of the gene. Promoters are like switches in genes that turn the genes off and on and are involved in causing these genes to produce transcripts or RNAs at certain levels and certain amounts at certain rates in the right tissues at the right time. And so it turns out that the second promoter in this particular gene, it's called the DDX11L2 gene. The second promoter in this gene is the fusion site. So this is not just DNA sitting there doing nothing. The fusion site, and I have to use the term fusion site because it's really not a fusion site. It's a promoter inside a gene. And it's very common for genes to have promoters in their first intron inside them, as well as promoters in front of the gene. This is common across the human genome. And so, and another important thing to understand is that you have genes on both strands of the DNA molecule. DNA is double-stranded. You have a plus strand and a minus strand. When we annotate genomes, we always annotate genes as to whether they're on the plus strand or the minus strand. And the genes run in opposite directions from each other on these strands. This particular gene is on the minus strand. So the message is not your typical message that's portrayed in the fusion site sequence. It's actually in the reverse complement of that sequence. So that's what the machinery in the nucleus, the various proteins that are called transcription factors are recognizing is in this other orientation on the minus strand. And so my new research that I have developed totally confirms that this fusion site is totally functional. It binds all sorts of transcription factors, over 50 different transcription factors, including RNA polymerase II, which is the main polymerase that transcribes genes in the genome. Okay, RNA polymerase II transcribes all the protein coding genes and the long non-coding RNA genes. And in fact, these genes, these protein coding genes and long non-coding RNA genes share many of the same transcription factors. But what's really cool about this gene that contains this alleged fusion site that functions as a second promoter is that it's highly networked with many other genes that are involved in high-level cell processes, high-level, very important cell processes. And so it's heavily networked with these other genes. It's heavily integrated into the genomic networks of the cell. It functions in over 250 different types of cell types that have been analyzed so far. And what's also really interesting is that my new research, mining the new ENCODE databases and this new version of a database in Japan called the Phantom database, which is also a database that studies gene expression, shows that this fusion site region, which is about 798 bases long, contains multiple start points for transcription where our RNA polymerase II binds. So there's multiple transcription start points within this region, or transcription start sites. They call them TSSs for transcription start sites. So this is a hotbed of activity. It's not a fusion site. It's a functional region inside a gene that is completely on fire and highly expressed.
Right. And just for the sake of the viewers, when you say a transcription site or a starting site, you're saying there's multiple ones, basically, when it's reading the DNA and doing something with it?
That's where the messenger RNA is starting. The 5' end of that messenger RNA, that's where it is starting at the transcription start site.
Right. So you got multiple things that are starting in that region.
Yes. Right.
All right. It's over. So I'll let you guys respond to that for a little while, and then at least maybe 10, 15 minutes, and then I got to end the hangout, guys. It's 3 in the morning.
Well, if I can go first, I think what he said was exactly the way I'd characterized it before, where it's sort of understood and it's well established that chromosome 2 is a fusion, but then it's disputed. And I said there's precisely one guy out there who says that the concern he has with it is that it's a hotbed of activity, as he said finally at the end of that droning speech about the various emails he's had with Ken Miller, and Ken Miller admitted he was right, which is you can go look at the email. Like that's
no, you didn't hear what he said though. He's actually written articles on this topic.
In the Blaze? Somebody else quoted the email in the Blaze? Well, okay.
No, when they gave his introduction, he's published articles on this.
Yeah, well, then that needs to be looked into. And the thing is, what you brought to us, Drew, was you said that when we were trying to describe you about these telomeric sequences, you were saying, well, there's something about the motifs and the patterns and you were using these. None of that stuff came up in this video at all. He didn't discuss motifs and patterns.
He went on about telling you that it's not a fusion site. It's one consistent strand of DNA. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that. I know I messed up. But
it is.
But I'm talking about the patterns, the motifs that you're seeing inside of the.
Yeah, but you talked about motifs and tandem repeats, and I'm just trying to remember some of the things that you mentioned.
No, if it were 2 chromosomes, Hogtie, if it were 2 chromosomes, you would expect to see 2 centromeres, but you don't see 2 centromeres. You see 1. No, you don't. You see 1 centromere.
No, there's. Oh, I see. Okay, it's the centromeres you were talking about when you were talking about the tandem repeats. Yeah, you do. Is that why you brought up the tandem repeats? Was it because of the centromeres?
Well, yeah. Well, I'm telling you is that if I'm bringing this up now because you're saying that it's 2 chromosomes, it's not 2 chromosomes. If it were 2 chromosomes, you would expect to see two centromeres, but you don't see 2 centromeres. You see 1 centromere.
Well, you see 1 centromere and 1 depreciated, or one might say vestigial centromere. But you don't
even see a vestigial centromere. You just see one centromere in the whole chromosome.
Well, there is only 1 functional centromere. The chromosome wouldn't function if they were in the same way as other chromosomes if there were 2 centromeres. But
you heard what he said before. If they were to fuse the same way, because there are fusion events. This is what I was bringing up earlier. But there are fusion events that take place, and he brought up the guy in China. But if they fuse like this at the ends, like you guys are saying, this is dangerous and is hazardous to life. So it would undergo apoptosis, and it would actually cause it to self-destruct. The cell would destroy itself.
Well, so you say. It says. But the thing is, you can say, well, usually this is the kind of thing that happens, right? I mean, we have the same discussion around more simple.
Well, this event doesn't happen anywhere whatsoever. There's fusion events that happen with chromosomes, but they don't happen the same way where they fuse together at the end with
like they're saying with the two chromosome.
That's a really good point, because I was going to say the thing about his specific claim is that it's not merely that the telomere part, the two telomeres stuck together, that the so-called fusion site, that it shouldn't be a coding, but his point was that there's actually coding regions that span past the fusion site. I'm saying that point is in dispute, and there are a lot of people who've looked at the same data, because this stuff's available online. Like, other people can look at this. He's the only guy who says that he's found these sites. Ken Miller's published a really good explanation for how he actually, Tompkins misunderstands what he got out of it. Unfortunately, I have to leave it to somebody else to explain that. But let me get to the other point that was sort of not as striking. That is, he's claiming that there's coding going through that zone. Other people are saying, no, there's not. But the one thing I thought was really interesting was he said there are just no examples of spontaneous telomere-to-telomere fusions. And I had heard of one in yeast recently, and then I'll do a quick Google search for it. I got 13, and not science blogs and not something in the Blaze, but like academic journal articles citing modern observations of telomere-telomere fusions. And, I mean, it took me 4 seconds. So he's wrong if he says that these telomere-telomere fusions, just these, let's say end-to-end fusions, that these things just don't happen. And it doesn't matter if they don't happen routinely. The point is, it may be the case that 999 times out of 1,000, it's fatal for the organism.
The end-to-end fusions don't happen because that would trigger apoptosis. It's going to cause it to self-destruct.
Well, so you say.
I forget what the end result is of happening. I forget what it is. But there's like some serious like genetic problems that can actually take place in organisms if this actually were to happen. I forget what it was. I can't remember it, so I'm not even going to try to talk about it, because if I say the wrong thing, then I'm going to...
Well, how do you explain that whole family that's got fused DNA?
I mean, this is what I was talking
having
about
kids
before.
with you.
When I was bringing up apoptosis and telling you that, well, this fusion event if it happens this way, it's going to self-destruct, and I compared it to the man in China, another fusion event that can happen. This is what I was talking about. They can't fuse end-to-end like what they're saying. And at the end, like what you're saying, well, like he was pointing out, that's actually the start of certain functions that are happening. And it's like I'm saying to you, I mean, if you're only seeing one centromere inside of it, then you can't, and you would expect to see two, then, I mean, I don't know.
Okay, well, hang on a sec. You're saying, you're giving us examples. You're saying, well, look, as far as you know, there are a lot of chromosomal fusion events that lead to serious problems or even death, right? So therefore, it just never happens in a functional.
No, there's a lot of similar
mechanisms
like this.
And then you say, oh, but yeah, there's those 44 people that live in China or Scandinavia or wherever that family is. Oh, and we've got these yeasts where we've observed it happening. And
no, the fusion events are not done the same way. I think they fuse together on the... Well, I know this because I've researched it a long time ago. Everything that I said just now before this guy started talking, he confirmed exactly what I said. That's the point here. Everything that he's saying right now is word for word what I said before I shared the video.
You're right. You have a very strange understanding what the phrase word for word means.
What did I say about the men in China? The fusion event there, it's a different type of fusion event. We're talking about end-to-end, these end-to-end fusions, and it's not going to happen that way. And like I said, it's one chromosome. You're only seeing one centromere. You don't see two centromeres, though. So it's not a few.
It's one chromosome with 4 telomeres and one functional centromere and one non-functional centromere.
Yeah, but if it were 2 chromosomes, you would see 2 centromeres. We're only seeing indications of it being one chromosome.
Why would
that's
you
the
think one
only
chromosome would
implications
have
that we're
2
seeing? And all we're seeing here at the same time is problems if it were to fuse the way that you're saying.
Okay, the fact that you would just make the claim...
About to what you're saying to where they gap together, where you're saying that, he just explained it, that's actually starting new functions.
Wait a second, are you saying that you would expect to see 2 functional...
Let me give somebody else a chance to speak, please.
Okay, quick question. Are you saying that you would expect to see 2 functional centromeres?
Yes.
That's nuts. That's like...
I would expect... I'd go
back to grade 8 school kind of nuts.
If 2 chromosomes, well, what are you talking about? If you're talking about 2 chromosomes fusing, you would see 2 chromosomes. You wouldn't see 1. If we're seeing 1, it only indicates 1 chromosome. The thing is 1 chromosome.
Okay, I think you kept saying chromosome when you meant centromere.
I want to.
No, yeah. what you would expect to see.
Yeah, I'm sorry, chromosome. Centromere.
Yeah. Yeah. What you would expect to see is one long chromosome with one functional centromere and one depreciated or vestigial centromere. But you would still expect to see some centromere sequences in there. You
would expect to see two centromeres. We don't see two centromeres. There's only one centromere. And that's another reason to show that it's just one chromosome. I mean, if all this stuff is piling up against it, we have no reason to conclude that it's two chromosomes.
Then why do we have?
I'm like really tired, and I want to get to bed.
Me too. Why do we see the other? Why do we see the other section that has a non-functional, like all the centromeric sequences? What possible explanation is there for being at the?
You're saying that they're non-centromere sequences. That's what you're saying.
No, I've said all the way through they are centromeric sequences. I'm saying it's non-functional. It's not functional centromere.
There's only one functioning centromere.
Right.
There's nothing indicating that there's two centromeres.
Yes, there is something indicating that there's two centromeres.
There is nothing indicating that.
I just told you like 3 seconds ago.
I know that's what you're telling me, but that's not true. There's one chromosome with one centromere. There's one chromosome with one centromere. That's what. Hold on a second, Hogtie. There's only one chromosome with one centromere. The part that you're saying, this is a geneticist talking right now. He's not just like some average Joe. This guy was saying the exact same things that I was saying before he went live and he started talking. He talked about if it would have diffused at those parts, it would actually be dangerous and hazardous for life.
Well, you can repeat it, but
that's exactly what I told you right before we went live. That's exactly what I told you right before I showed the video. That if this type of event fused at the ends, like we're claiming, that it would cause it to actually self-destruct through apoptosis. It would destroy it. So I mean, I don't know how much more clear I can make it. I mean,
let's set aside the dozens of examples where there's been fusions and they haven't died.
The event that you're pointing out, as he said, it's starting something new. There's actually a production going on right there. It's important, but I want to give somebody else a chance to speak. We've been on this for a while.
And thank you. Yeah, I'll listen for a bit more, but then I'm off to bed. Thanks, folks.
Okay. Thank you, Jesus. You just came in. You haven't been able to speak at all. And Scorpio, you can go on. Oh, and Robbie. I'm sorry. I didn't even see you there, Robbie. I apologize. Okay, so go ahead. Thank you, Jesus, and Scorpio.
And Daryl, I see you there. Man.
Are the people going to be broadcasted?
Can you broadcast Daryl
and Eddie?
Yeah, I see him there. I'm trying to broadcast him now. In fact, Reiner.
All right.
I've been talking this whole time. I just haven't even been paying attention to these guys.
Nah, man. Just I want to say hi. Thanks for the hangout and really just listening in, man.
All right,
man. Trying to learn.
All right, Scorpio. What you got? Anything to say?
Oh, well, my interest was piqued in the cosmology comments, but I've just more been listening. I've thrown a couple of things in the side chat there earlier, and a couple of the points that you had mentioned about the hybridization and that you can, with like the big cats, you can expect possible hybridization between certain species, like the lion, tiger, leopard, because they're geographic overlap. Whereas you're highly unlikely to see a tiger jaguar cross, which are possible. They have actually produced, but of course this is a deliberate breeding of, the two cats that would normally never have met, right? So.
Yeah. So, Daryl, you got anything you'd like to say?
Not really. The
Are you Daryl Sor? Yeah, you're Daryl Sor. You're the dude that keeps sending me messages. Hey, I'm glad you came in, man.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, the only thing really is the two telomeres connected in the middle. That seems to be called a balanced Robertsonian translocation. I was having a quick look, and it does seem to be that you get the end-to-end connection.
Yeah, I disagree. So
Well, there's
I'll
lots of
leave it at
examples
that.
in
I
humans
don't want
and
to get
other
back into that
species.
again.
Yeah.
But
We're just so the audience knows, there's plenty of, just do a search for balanced Robertsonian translocation and telomere fusion. There's dozens of examples from humans, other apes, yeast.
yeah, but they don't fuse end to end like this though. That's the point.
Okay, so when I just said
There's
that
a
you
lot
do
of
search for
different fusion.
telomere
There's a
fusion.
lot of different fusion events. I agree with that. I'm the one who actually brought that up. But when I included apoptosis,
not end-to-end fusion. Okay.
okay, when I included apoptosis, I mean the guy went to about explaining the different types of fusions. Before I played the video, I explained that. I told you, well, this would happen if it would have fused at the ends, if it would have fused the same way. But there are other individuals like the men in China who had undergone a fusion event as well. But it's not the same type of fusion event. But anyways, I don't want to go back into that direction. I'm going to let somebody else speak. Back Spider. Well, we can talk. How about this? We can do another hangout tomorrow on this issue if you want to, Hogtie. You want to talk about it tomorrow? Because it's 3:30 in the morning, and if we keep it up, we'll be here.
Yeah, 2:30 here, but I got a road trip coming up. I'll be gone for the weekend.
All right. So, Fact Finder, do you have anything you'd like to say about this?
I do.
Okay, Robbie, what would you like to say? 'Cause I gotta.
Yeah. I think that you covered a lot. I think that Hogtie you phantom chromosomes and things like that, and he knows that I have trisomy 21, and you know that Hogtie that I have Down syndrome, known as trisomy 21, and which covers right into the trident of Poseidon's trident, like the seal of the fish. The fish represents us as Christians, but yeah, when it comes to people like myself, I would have to say that what true interferism was trying to talk about was interference with different types of chromosomes, and when it gets to the chromosome 21, which is the trisomy, and I am the one who represents the special needs community who happens to have trisomy 21 or muscular dystrophy and other things that has happened. But I will mention more of this tomorrow, and if anyone wants to talk about chromosome 21, which happens to be 21 chromosomes that infuses themselves together by your mother and your father, which it inspirts, the word is inspirt to your growth, and as you grow from that point of view, you're looking at your genesis as in God has given you the birth and rebirth by spirit and soul. And by saying that, you're looking at the trisomy. You're looking at someone with the genetics that is close to the point that they're either gonna do something bad to themselves or with mental issues. That's what we're looking at. And what's your ask Marsh? That we need to understand that we are out here. We are. And we are the people of the future. from the thing to understand is,
Okay, Robbie.
yeah,
Okay.
I really need people, you guys, to watch Ron Haskell over here.
All right, Robbie. Thank you, Robbie. Zach Feiner, do you have anything you'd like to say?
Sure. His mic is not working, so he wanted us to read this. He says, I thought the video was great. It addressed the disagreement perfectly and clearly established that the outlandish claim Ken Miller very proudly made was wrong.
That video was awesome. That video really did. I mean, it confirmed almost like every word that I was saying.
Can I just
Okay.
Just quickly plug in something, just real quick. I'm trying to get an interview / discussion with Professor Vincent Recaniello from the University of Columbia University in New York, within the Department of Microbiology and Immunology. He's got a few podcasts such as This Week in Evolution, This Week in Microbiology, This Week in Parasitism, and so forth. And
Okay, so why are you plugging this in?
Yeah. So I would like to. I'm trying to get him into like a hangout to have a discussion of some sort. And if any creationist is up to it, I'd like to have at least one or two of them in there. Possibly Sam and Fiona as well. And just to go into about the discussion of viral evolution.
Yeah.
Discuss
Okay.
some points there.
All right. That's great. So nobody else has got anything else to say, right?
I got one really quick thing. I got an email from Nephilim Free a couple of years ago where he admitted that I was right and he was wrong about the age of the universe, and I'll send that over to Daryl and he can post it up on his Google Plus feed, thereby making it true.
Okay, so what is that supposed to be about? Like now, what's up, man? What's that all about?
Well, because we just played a video where a guy said he tells this long story about this back and forth email exchange that he had with Ken Miller, where he says
no, that's not true. He was talking about that, but the reason why I shared that video was because he's got a PhD in genetics.
Yeah, I know.
He's a geneticist, and he's published articles on it. I mean, I can replay the beginning to where they go about talking about it. That video that I found, everything that he was saying was confirming what I said beforehand. So I mean, I don't think there's really anything up for debate. If you can show another geneticist saying what you're saying, then I can see.
I'll just try to end it on a chuckle, because he says in there that, I exchanged some email with Ken Miller, where Ken Miller admitted that he was wrong about something and I was right about that thing, and I know somebody who published it in The Blaze. And you just had a guy in the hangout say, boy, that sure showed that Ken Miller was wrong. Well, wrong.
Yeah, but you can't use that one little point to straw man.
Couldn't even
you can't use that one little point to straw man everything else that was said. You can't do that.
I addressed what was already said. There are other people who know how ENCODE works better than I do in these genetic databases who've reviewed it, and they say that it's a very clear misunderstanding. The gene that he's talking about is beside the twin telomeric sequence, not passing through the telomeric sequence.
No.
Okay. Well, no. I mean, yes. That's
no. I mean, I just explained to this before I even showed the video. What you're talking about, you're going to need to show a different point of the telomeric repeats that you're actually seeing. I mean, you can't just point to something that is consistent that you're finding throughout the chromosome. I mean, you can't do that. I mean, that specific section that you're pointing at, it's like he said, it has a job. It's doing something specific there. So, I mean, I don't know how much more.
That's what he says, that he's the only one on the planet. 7 billion people on the planet. He's the one guy who found this encoding sequence. Everybody else who's looked at the same data says no.
So you're saying there's absolutely no other geneticist out there that says the same thing. Now you're going on an ad populum fallacy, first of all. But are you gonna make it so if I find
that's not an ad populum fallacy. That's not what that is.
Yeah, you're basically saying that because a lot more people disagree, therefore whatever you're saying is true. He's a geneticist, and if he's published articles about it, then that's what you got to deal with. You got to deal with what he's saying, not just saying I got to find more people that agree with me.
If I say my dad is a police officer and he thinks you're a criminal, that's authority. Sorry, I'm doing the wrong one. I'm doing authority.
I'm sorry, not genetic fallacy, an ad populum fallacy. Did I say genetic fallacy?
No, you
ad
did. You said, sorry, we're both tired. You said the right one. I said the wrong one. I switched over to authority for some reason. If I say, 60 out of 100 scientists believe a certain way, well, that's ad populum. But if I say 60 out of 100 scientists who are trained in studying this stuff and have made a study of this thing based on their review of the evidence that they provided, and here you can look at this too, that's not an ad populum fallacy. And the reason is because it's an ad populum fallacy only when your premise is that when people agree on things, it tends to be true, because that's demonstrative.
Okay, the point is this, that I don't agree with that at all, because you said it's popular here on the internet, but whenever I'm reading anything about this stuff, this is not really that popular. I mean, I think it was popular at one point because people were getting ahead of themselves when this information came out, but it's not that popular anymore. I mean, because it's not true.
Yeah. Well, Daryl just actually typed out that.
And anyways, I mean, I would still say that ad populum fallacy, what you're saying, would fall under the category of an ad populum fallacy.
Well,
I were to agree that it was true that more people were agreeing with what you were saying, because if your stance is to say, well, I got a lot of people agreeing with me and my point, therefore it's true. I mean, that would be a fallacy.
It would be if that was the argument. If the argument were premise one, when people agree on things, it tends to be true. Premise two, people tend to agree on X. Conclusion, therefore, X is probably true. But that's not the thing. That's not what it is. It's saying, look,
all right, Hogtie,
a large number. Let me make this point. A large number, because you do this all the time, where you say that that's this fallacy or that fallacy. You don't realize to make it a fallacy, you have to misrepresent the other person's argument. So I'm saying a lot of scientists have looked into this.
For it to be a fallacy, it's got to be a non sequitur. That's the only thing that matters.
Daryl just typed it on the side. What's being said about it? About how the where was it here? But in some of the databases, there's transcript variants that include the head-to-head telomere sequence motifs as one of the introns. I don't know. I mean, a person has to look into this. I'm saying
the head-to-head telomeric. Well, the telomeric repeats. I think that's kind of the point as well. But a head-to-head fusion like that would cause it to go under apoptosis, like I've been saying. It's dangerous for the chromosome, but.
Well, I'm just saying that when other experts look into it, because this Tompkins raises the issue, and other experts look into it, and they say, I don't see that that's a coding region, and then they look at the gene that he's pointing to, and they say, oh, not only do I see where that gene is, but I even see his specific mistake and how he misread this part of the database, and they're able to describe to people what the mistake was.
All right. If you've got a scientist who can criticize what he's saying and correct everything that he said right here, share everybody the name of that scientist who will discredit it.
Yeah, it's not for opinions.
My recollection.
I could not hear anything because you guys just overtalked each other.
Yeah, the quote I shared in the side chat is actually Ken Miller.
Ken Miller, that was who I was thinking of.
Ken Miller.
Yeah.
Okay, so Ken Miller, he mentioned Ken Miller, so I don't know.
Well, yeah, he mentioned Ken Miller. He said, well, Ken Miller once sent me an email where Ken Miller had to admit he was wrong about something and I was right, la da da.
Yeah.
And
but that's not his basis. He's giving reasons why he disagrees. It's not just grounded in Ken Miller. I mean, he went about talking about, he had articles written by it. So I mean, I think you're just trying to. I think what you're trying to do is you're trying to be negative to the geneticist that was speaking because he didn't like what he was saying towards.
No, that's not true, and that's apology.
All I got to say is that everybody, I'll leave it at this. All right, everybody go check out what Hogtie just said. And everybody go check out what I said. I'm more than willing to bet that you're going to probably find some of the things that Hogtie was talking about, like there being remnants of a second centromere. But I'm also willing to bet that those remnants of a centromere are going to be discredited, or they're not going to be what they're talking about. So I'll just leave it at that because I have confidence that the information is in my favor. And if you guys think that it's in his favor, everybody that's listening to me, whether Christian or theist or atheist, whatever, you do the research yourself and you come to your own conclusion. Is that fair?
Yeah, I like that. And also whether it was a fusion or not doesn't have anything to God was there or wasn't there. I think that's a totally separate question.
You just had to say that.
No. I was going to say if you've got faith, then keep your faith. Don't look at this chromosome fusion 2 issue and then say, well, I got to stop believing in God. That would be crazy.
Well, yeah. Well, I would agree with that, but I think we're on this chromosome issue. Well, first of all, that's another point. Actually, I'm glad I didn't forget to mention this, because this is all getting brought up because that one individual that came in the room said that it was actually a prediction, and he actually pointed out why it actually wasn't a prediction, because they were going to be looking for something else. But, anyways, I'm going to end the hangout right now because I'm going to keep talking until 8 o'clock in the morning if we don't stop.